Hi everyone, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. Quite recently, as many of you will know, Alan Lancaster passed away after a long battle with multiple sclerosis. As a member of Status Quo, Alan became a rock and roll giant and was loved by so many fans all over the planet. In the 1970s, his thumping bass lines filled our suburban Sydney household via numerous Quo records, and he's been a part of our world ever since. For more than half his life, Al called Australia home, and after leaving Status Quo, was a member of both the Party Boys and the Bombers, two bands who I saw a lot, the Bombers in particular, forever holding a special place in my rock and roll heart. It's true, Alan's memory will always live on via the wonderful rock and roll which he leaves behind. However, it is my hope that this tribute will also be a lasting reminder of a great man, something special for family, friends, former bandmates, crew and fans of Alan's to keep close. You know, the times I spoke to Alan, he was humble, polite and, as others will attest, one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. I do wish to thank everyone who graciously gave me their time in sharing their thoughts and memories of Al during this sad time, especially his former bandmates John Brewster, Kevin Borich, Ty Coates, Swanee and Paul Christie. It really means a lot. We'll hear the chat with John Brewster straight after a song. This one's for you, Alan Lancaster. Thank you for the memories and thank you for the great rock and roll.
G'day.
Hey John, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Yeah, good, Dennis. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thank you for doing this at such short notice. I have read some UK press online which I thought brushed over Al's time in both the Party Boys and the Bombers. It's a huge part of his career and a time period I'm very fond of, so I thought a tribute to him done with an Australian flavour could be nice.
Yeah. A great period of time for me too, personally, with Al, both working for him and also next-door neighbours. We were next-door neighbours for close to 13 years. So I met Al when I left the Angels for a while and joined the Party Boys. I went round to Al's place probably, I think it was the day that I met him, actually. Went round to his place in Double Bay and we finished upstairs in his music room and I think we wrote our first song together that day.
Wow, so had your paths crossed before then? John, did you get along to see Quo on any of their tours here in the 70s?
Yeah, way back in the 70s in Adelaide at the Apollo Stadium, I saw Quo, and that was a great experience. I think we might have even still, I think we had only just formed the Keystone Angels out of the Moonshine Jacket String Band.
Okay, last time we chatted, we spoke a lot about your influences, going to see the Beatles in '64. I am curious, if I can ask, if Status Quo and their Pictures of Matchstick Men single found its way onto your turntable in the late '60s.
I don't think so, no. Not that I didn't like it. I did like it, and I still do. No, I mean, I've got a couple of Quo albums that, yeah, I mean, they're a great rock band, you know.
Sure.
I mean, that's the thing about great rock bands. They don't really ever date. I don't think so, anyway. No. You know, you look at ZZ Top or AC/DC, and I'd like to say us as well, the Angels, and, you know, music doesn't sound dated. It's kind of classic stuff. It's sort of like the folk music of the modern era.
Mm-hmm. John, I had Alan on the podcast a couple of years back when the Bombers' posthumous live album was released and spoke to him about the musical chemistry which the two of you had. He spoke very highly of you. And just before calling you, I did re-listen to that interview, and his comments really do highlight the mutual respect you both had for each other. Alan said, as soon as we played together, we looked up at one another and smiled because we knew that we had that little spark, that thing that happens, and from there on we had this amazing partnership. We could have written and played forever. John and I were perfectly matched, and he could do the things that Rick Parfitt could do in Quo. Great musician, and we just gelled together.
Oh, wow, that kind of, I feel a bit misty to hear you quote that. It's, and he's right, it was very much a mutual thing. The thing with, if you can play good rock music, it's all about a chemistry, you know. Mm-hmm. It's nothing to do with whether you learn to play an instrument. I mean, that's got something to do with it, of course. But I came out of a band that had a fantastic groove, and as soon as I played with Al, same thing happened. Of course, we played with John Coghlan for a while too, with the Bombers.
That's right.
And so a combination of the right rhythm guitar playing and bass playing and drumming. That's where it all. That's your engine room. And I said just the other day to Glenn A. Baker that Quo released an album called Pole Driver, and they could have named that album appropriately after Al's bass playing, because that's what he was like. He just an absolute powerhouse of a bass player, but it grooved as well. It had the lilt. That's what it's all about. You could have a drummer hit the beat on the back beat, and with Al driving that, there it is. That's where the tension comes from. And, when playing with Coghlan was a great experience, because that's the rhythm section of Status Quo. And then, of course, John Coghlan had to go back to England, and Peter Heckenberg came in, and again, another magic combination. I've been very blessed in life to have played with some wonderful people. Still am. But as we speak, Dennis, I'm pretty blue because Al was a great friend, and I wasn't, thanks to COVID, I didn't get a chance to go over to Sydney to say goodbye, because I live in South Australia now, and that was a bit hard, but fortunately I did speak to him on the phone not that long ago, him and Dale. His wife Dale, who's a wonderful person.
I did mention to Alan, and he confirmed this during our interview, and I've mentioned this to others in recent days, that working with guys like yourself and KB really seemed to rejuvenate him at that time in his life. But in many ways, you both did share a unique bond in that Alan was picking up the pieces after leaving Quo, as you were doing after exiting the Angels.
Yeah. Al was hit pretty hard by that separation from Quo. It was a little bit different for me, but, I wasn't so bitter. Yeah. It was something I needed to do. I needed to go. My brother Rick and I needed a break from each other. And, it was a pretty intense days. We kept touring overseas, and, we did a lot better overseas than people realise, actually. The whole west coast of America, we were a pretty major band, in places like Chicago, New York, etc. When you got out in the Midwest, it was a bit harder, with, playing small clubs and stuff. But boy, you had to make a lot of money in America to not lose money, and we kept getting massive debt and have to come to Australia and work it off. And
I know what you're trying to say.
Back then, I think, because we played too many gigs, but we were paying them back the bank, So, I had my own thoughts, and definitely it was a hard separation for me, and for Al it was very bitter, and he was bitter for years, and I'm just so pleased for him. Actually, I should say I'm pleased for both of us, because I rejoined the Angels, and my brother and I are very, very close, and, we just got through that period really well. The 80s were crazy. The mid-80s was just a crazy period.
You've just mentioned that, John, and it is something I want to point out, that Al rejoining his Quo bandmates in 2013 and 14 really was proof that some dreams can come true. It says a lot about Alan's character, though, that issues and broken friendships can be mended, and, for one final time, Alan and Status Quo could show the rock world how it's done. Yeah,
and of course it was enormously successful, as it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the real Quo to me, and look, we've all gone through lineup changes, not the least us. We've had a lot of lineup changes over the years, and not only, musicians in the band, but obviously Doc Neeson leaving the band back in 2000. We got back together again in 2008. That only lasted a couple of years, and then Doc wanted to leave again, and in came Dave Gleeson, and we've never looked back from that. That's been fantastic. But it's it's not necessarily guaranteed, It's a hard thing to do, to replace a singer. And to me, Status Quo was one of those bands. There was no front singer. It was just a great four-piece. It was all there. And you know, I don't really want to knock the guys, but the subsequent lineups of Status Quo leave me cold. The original one, fantastic.
John, Al called Australia home for a long, long time. He loved it here, and the rock fraternity in turn embraced him. What do you think he enjoyed most about this country?
Well, I know that he loves Australia. Back in those days, he and I spent a fair bit of time on the road. So, you know, he was always happy to be driving around, as I've done for the last nearly close to 50 years. And you know, Al's weird sense of humour, but he loved his own jokes. As I say, we were next door neighbours for like 13 years, and I'd sit in the living room with Al and Dale, and Al would say something, and I'd say to Dale, "Could you interpret, please?" Because that Cockney accent, I could never quite understand him. Most of the time I could, but sometimes it's like, well, I don't know what he said then. But I'm jumping around the place. No. But yes, he loved Australia, and we had some wonderful years together. You know, with Party Boys. We did a gig with Swanee. I think it was the first gig we did when Swanee joined the band. And it was a pretty small crowd, and we were driving back. And it was down in Wollongong. We were driving back to Sydney, and at that stage I'd moved next door to him. And we were driving back, and Glenn A. Baker had sent us a cassette, had various songs on it. First song was "He's Gonna Step on You Again," and we were in the car. We have it in the car system, and Al and I just looked at each other, and we both had the same thought instantly. This is a Party Boys song. So, long story short, we produced that and sang it, and then Swanee sang on top of our vocal, etc., and it just gave it that absolute feeling of the Party Boys, you know, like a bunch of guys putting together this song. And Sunil de Silva came with all these African rhythm instruments, you know, and it just gave it that feeling of tribe. And the thing went number one. It's the only time I've ever said, being in the studio, I always used to put my head between the two speakers leaning over the desk, and we were mixing "He's Going to Step on You Again," and I said to Al and Mike Stavro, who was engineering, I said, "This is going to go number one." It's the only time I've ever said that in my life, and sure enough, it did. It did. I
remember you telling me that story way back on an early episode, and I do invite listeners to go back and check that out, because we dig right into the the Party Boys history. But let me ask you a question about, after having written with Rick and Doc for so long, I imagine it was refreshing to compose new material with someone like Alan. And I guess as a songwriter, what were some of Al's strengths?
Well, it's such a hard question. Well, musically, that's pretty easy to answer, because whenever we played, I'd start playing some kind of a chord progression or something, and we'd be sitting in a room, and he'd play bass to that, and then we'd start to develop a lyric. I can't really say. I can say a lot about how the music came together. Lyric is always a hard thing.
Yeah.
But generally, we'd find an angle, like "She's a Mystery," for example. That's one of the songs we wrote. We also wrote a song called "It's Just the Way to Say Goodbye," which I found myself. I was doing a gig with the band this last week in Perth, and I was in the hotel room. I had my guitar on my lap, and I started singing that song. Felt appropriate. But, I mean, generally, good songs come from some kind of angle,
Was it always you on a... Was it always you on acoustic and Al on bass, or did he sometimes work with an acoustic as well?
No, I think it was. My recollection is that I played the guitar and he played the bass.
Okay.
But doing it like that, you could just picture what was going to happen with the drums and I'm not a lead guitar player, so initially, of course, it was Kevy Borich, who's amazing, and it was a great honour for me to play with Kevy as well. And actually, it was interesting recording Kevin Borich because you always made sure you recorded his first run through, and invariably the first run through was the best of the lot. They were always good, but the first run through is always the best. I mean, in my opinion, it's because he's such an instinctive player that when he doesn't have to think about it, he plays brilliantly, and the more he thinks about it, it's not quite as good as it was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually, one of my great memories, is very happy memories, is that we were recording at Al's studio. He had a studio in North Sydney, and the playing room was down below the control room. You had to go down this kind of spiral staircase to get down there. So Kevy was down there playing on one of the tracks on the Party Boys album, and so he had a communication mic that was open the whole time, and it actually, the only way to use that was it went to tape. So when you're recording, it was actually recorded as well. Mm. And Kevin was playing this solo, and became aware of this noise. And I went, "What's that noise? There's a noise somewhere. What's that all about?" And so we started isolating tracks to find out where this noise was coming from. And sure enough, it was the communication mic. And it was the weirdest thing. It was just brilliant. As he was playing the guitar, he was making all these noises with his voice that was going absolutely. If you just soloed the guitar in his voice, it was incredible.
Wow.
He was, like these great, whoa, and all this sort of stuff, wailing away. But obviously, it didn't finish up in the mix, but it was great.
Can I ask, did you write with Alan in recent years? And if so, do you think any of that material could see the light of day?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that Al's got such a massive name in Europe. Mm. When we did our Bombers album, we signed with A&M Records in America, and at the same time, A&M England wanted to sign us. So what we figured was, we signed to Jerry Moss in Los Angeles, and they paid in advance. I think at that time it was the biggest advance paid to an Australian
that's right.
on their first signing, and so we could afford to do this album properly. And when I say that, you can make a great song in a back room, but we had this. We had a fantastic time recording that album. Went to England and mixed it in England and got a 5-star review in Kerrang magazine. And the sad reality is that A&M sold the company to Polygram, and that kind of pulled the rug out from under us because Polygram just basically signed so they could have Jerry Moss become the chairman of the company and to keep Sting on the roster and Janet Jackson, and they dropped something like 30 acts. So that was a hard time for us, and that's because we were on a roll. We'd just done the Alice Cooper tour. I played golf with Alice every day, and Alice offered us the US tour. But once we lost that record deal, there's no point going over there, you see, because we couldn't. But I'm proud of that album.
Very much so, very much so. And I've written a lot about the band and that album. It's a time period I'm very fond of it. And, John, I do wish to share possibly my favourite memory of Alan with you, if I may. I have mentioned it before on this show, but it just shows how humble a man he was. So the setting is the Crow's Nest Hotel, late 88. It's the first residence gig there for the band. I'm with a friend of mine who incidentally saw Choir at Hammy Odeon in 1980, but once the band had finished their first set, Alan comes off stage, gets a drink, walks over to the two of us, says hi, and matter-of-factly asks, "How's the sound?" That will always live with me. No pretentiousness or rock star trappings, just a musician who was kicking off a new band and wanted a fan's opinion. So after chatting for a while, Al walks off and my mate turns to me amazed and says, "The man opened up Live Aid and asks me, how's the sound?" I mean, I just love that story.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were on the Live Aid as well. And this, I think we played after In Excess.
Yeah.
But Al was a humble guy, and he's in it for all the right reasons, in it for music, and we were of like mind. I mean, I've never seen myself as anybody special. I just guitar player in a rock and roll band that happened to have written a few songs that people like. But working with Al was just fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, I have stated
pretty hard to get him out of the bathroom though. He lived next door, and we'd be going to a gig, and I'd go to the front door and go, "For God's sake, Al, get in the car. We got to go." He'd be upstairs. He had more hair products than anyone I've ever known.
Well, I have stated this elsewhere. I have stated
Sorry?
this elsewhere on the podcast, but it is a message about the kind of person Alan Lancaster was, that although very successful, he remained grounded and treated everyone within his world, be it fans, band members or crew, with courtesy and respect. And that's a wonderful thing. Not many people have that quality, do they? Well,
yeah, maybe it's Angus Young, Malcolm Young, they've got that quality. Well, Malcolm no longer with us, but they had that quality too. So did George Young. I learned a lot in my career from George Young in particular. Harry Vander too, wonderful people, and they were very grounded.
I recently dug out a couple of plectrums which Al gave me after a gig in the 80s. My gosh, the hard plastic edges just have huge chunks out of them. And it really does give an indication of how hard Alan played. He really was, the best of the best when it came to heavy bass players, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really dug in. Yeah.
Dug in's a good word.
It's a bit different when you play rhythm guitar. You dig in there too, but you don't destroy plectrums the same way. But, when you're hitting those big, thick strings, he'd hit them really hard, but he's always on the front of it. He would drive the band, he'd drive the drummer. And as I said, I think I said earlier in this chat with you that if it works, if rock music works, it's because it's something between the bass player and the drummer, where the bass player can drive the drummer, but the drummer holds it back. So that's that backbeat swing, which back when you first put together a rock band, like with Buzz Bidstrup, Chris Bailey, in our first main lineup of the Angels, when we changed the name and started recording at Albert's, was we may not have known why it worked. Now I look back on it, now I know, because you have that tension. That tension is what makes a song sound exciting. AC/DC have always had it, and I think we've pretty much always had it as well. Definitely Status Quo, but not Status Quo without Alan in it. I think that it's a chemistry that happens between people. It produces great music.
John, I would like to, before we finish up, make mention of a timely new Party Boys release, part of the Desk Tape series recorded at the Tivoli in Sydney in 87. And if anyone ever needs a reminder of just how much firepower was in that band at that time period, I do encourage them to go and buy that. In particular, Al's vocals on tracks like, I think, Live Wire and Driving Me Crazy. It's just such a wonderful recording, and it's great that has seen the light of day.
Yeah, it was a great lineup, Again, it's had that magic kind of chemistry. It was an interesting lineup too, because there was no real frontman. Swan would finish up the show, of course, but we'd start without him, and then he'd come on stage and finish up the show. And it was, Kevy sang, and I sang, and Al sang. It was great times.
Yeah,
fantastic times. And because of Step On You that went through the roof, I mean, we were pulling massive crowds, so it was good fun.
Mate, our chat today was not really about the music. You and I covered so much of that on a previous episode. Today really was about Alan Lancaster and the person he was. And John, this is a tough one, but what will you miss most about Al? And is there a particular memory of him which you'll always carry with you?
Well, I haven't worked with Al for many years, but Al and Dale live in an apartment, and I always stay with a friend of mine, Matt Laverty. He's a golf professional, and when Rick and I are in town, we stay there. Of course, we haven't been able to for like 18 months or so, probably 18 months. And the apartment that Al and Dale lived in, I actually was on the phone to Dale, I think, and I said, you should come and check out these apartments because I knew they were looking for somewhere. So I'm making a long answer of your question, but they came down that afternoon and bought their apartment up that day. And so when I'd visit or be over in Sydney playing gigs for the Angels, sometimes they'd come to the gig too, by the way. They came to our symphony show at the Sydney Opera House. But I'd always I'd just wander across their block of apartments and go upstairs and have coffee and whatever, I'll certainly miss that because it was always lovely to see him, and we'd play a few things. Al's released an album that I haven't actually got in my possession yet, but and that was us playing at Crow's Nest.
Oh, the posthumous one?
Oh, maybe that's the one you're talking about, is it?
Yeah.
I need a copy of that because I want to hear it. Because Al played me some of that, and I just thought it was phenomenal. I went, Jag, wow,
it is.
Was that good? It's always, like I'd walk in there and we'd have a hug and then sit and chat for a couple of hours, and I'll certainly miss that. But, and I'll miss the man enormously. And hopefully I'll keep in touch with Dale. We're very good friends as well. She's just been through a horrible time looking after Al. She's somebody pretty special.
John Brewster, thank you for your time today. Always lovely to talk with you. It is a sad time for so many, and I know that you and Al shared so much. You stood left of him on so many stages at countless venues. Many of my fondest memories are of watching you two perform together, and I thank you so much for sharing some memories of Alan with us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to talk to you, Dennis. Yes, it is a very sad time, but I'm glad we're talking about him. It's really not. I mean, I've been thinking about him every day,
Tyrone Coates fronted the Bombers in the late 1980s and early 90s, co-writing some wonderful material, much of which you will find on the Bombers album titled Aim High. Ty remained friends with Alan after the Bombers folded. He's also a friend of ours and a guy who continues to produce great music. We'll hear Ty's memories of Alan now.
Alan did a lot of stuff in Australia that a lot of people probably aren't aware of because they're so focused on his time with Quo and to a degree with the Party Boys and the Bombers. But he did a lot of other stuff and he helped a lot of people, and he was always a real stalwart for developing new talent and encouraging, and he was an awesome mentor in that way. So, mate, I guess as is well documented, Alan and John Brewster, discovered you in an outfit called Boys Down Under. They were doing a Party Boys support. So an obvious first question is, what are your memories of the very first time you met Al? Oh, look, the first time I met Al, I was, obviously I knew who he was, and it was like, oh my God, Alan Lancaster from Status Quo. But he was just such a down-to-earth, approachable guy, and he was just so humble, and I was blown away by that. And he was interested in me. He wanted to find out all about me and, what I'd done before and my musical background and everything. And all I wanted to do was just fire 1,000 questions at him. But, that's the kind of guy he was. He was just really an empathetic type of person, and he always took an interest in others. Saying he was a nice guy really doesn't do it justice. I think he was so much more than that, just a really decent person. Oh, look, he was, mate. He was always encouraging to me because, I'd been, playing in bands since I was like, a kid. But, going on to that level was kind of a bit of a step up for me. So and he was always very eager to, help me and assist me and give me advice, and he wanted to listen to what my thoughts on stuff too. It wasn't like it was a dictatorial thing. There was just a great empathy there, and I got on famously with Al, and him and I really hit it off, and not on the music scene as well, but just as personal friends. And he recommended. He's a big reader. I don't know whether many people know that. And I'm a big reader too, and he put me onto some awesome books, and we exchanged books, back in the Bombers days, and we used to read a lot and talk about the different books we read and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was an interesting side of him that a lot of people don't really know about.
Just going on from that, you mentioned there that Al would ask your opinion, on things. Obviously, in those early days. I've got a quick story I'll share with you that I think it was maybe the very first time I saw the band at Crow's Nest in late 88, November 88. I was with a friend who I'm still good friends with, Robin from London. He'd seen choir at Hammersmith Odeon in 1980. And he was obviously awestruck that Alan, you could see Alan in a pub, and he was out from England at that time. So the band, as you would know, did 2 sets. During the break, Alan comes up to myself and my friend Robin, and so matter-of-factly he asks, how's the sound? How was the sound? So after 5 or 10 minutes of chat, Al walks away, and my friend looks at me and he goes, the man opened Live Aid, and he's asking me how's the sound? I mean, more than anything, that's one of my lasting memories, which will live with me of Alan, of just how humble. And he didn't, he'd been to the top of the rock world. He didn't have to be like that at all. But that's just really the mark of the man, isn't it?
Look, 100%. And I think Alan's one of those, few larger-than-life rock stars that never forgot where they came from. And, he came from fairly humble beginnings too, I think. And he was a very accomplished musician, and again, a lot of people don't realise this about Al, but he started off on cello, and he was classically trained on cello, and he read very fluently. He read music, and I remember back in, I think maybe the early 90s, he produced a record for Roger Woodward, who's obviously a pianist, and Alan went in there and he scored it all, produced it, wrote all the music for it, and kind of did the whole studio thing, and it's just fantastic. It came out, and I got a copy of it, and it's just wonderful. And that's another side of Al's musical prowess that a lot of people aren't aware of too. That he's just such a really good musician's musician.
I know that you've always backed yourself, mate, and exuded confidence. But during those first couple of rehearsals with the Bombers, did you have to pinch yourself and say, "My God, that's Status Quo's thumping rhythm section I'm playing with"?
Yeah, look, I guess so. I was pretty confident, maybe even bordering on cocky, I suppose. But I think what really was mind-blowing is when I briefly joined the Party Boys, and we were all in the rehearsal room, and there was Paul, and there was there was a 2-drummer thing going on, and there was Kevin Borich and John Brewster and Alan, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is unbelievable. All these guys in one room, and there's this kid from Perth come over, and they've asked me to join the band, and that was amazing. That was just such a real eye-opener. But getting together with John and Alan, I guess the precursor to that was we'd done a lot of writing, so we'd written a lot of the Bombers' early songs together before that. So we'd got to know each other on a musical level as well, and they were just awesome to work with. Any ideas I had as far as lyrics or guitar riffs or anything, they were always completely open books with it, and they'd say, yep, let's have a listen, and okay, maybe we can use that, and maybe let's try this. But it was just like, it wasn't like me and them, it was just the three of us together writing those songs. It was just an amazing experience for me, and it was, I think it really set the stage, so to speak, for me to be confident and to believe in myself. Because if those guys had have been shooting me down in flames when I had ideas for songs, that could have been devastating long term, but it wasn't the case at all. They were just really encouraging, especially Al. He was just such a, he wanted to hear new ideas, and I guess he took the idea that this guy's young, he's fresh, and he wanted to hear what I had to say. So that was really humbling.
Post-Quo, Alan could have retired from the music industry. He'd climbed the mountain and then some, yet he joins the Party Boys and then puts all his energy into the Bombers. To me, that says so much about the man and his passion for music, doesn't it?
Oh, look, 100%. He just loved to play live. And I remember some of the, Bombers gigs, even, post the main lineup of the Bombers, when it was Lancaster Bombers, and Brett from the Choir Boys had left the band, and I jumped in on guitar and was doing some vocals, and we did a lot of gigs. And, some of those gigs were fairly, quiet gigs, and some of the, outlying venues. So, but it never fazed Alan. He just loved to play, and he didn't care if he was playing in front of 5 people or 5,000 people. He just, he turned it on all the time, and he just really had a passion for his craft.
Mate, you and Alan shared so much over a long period of time. And I guess, when you travel with someone in that situation, in vans, planes, motels, gigs, there obviously is a special bond which is formed. And it is hard to put it into words how much you learnt from Al. But I imagine that, the things you did learn from him, you're still putting into practice today with your current recordings.
Oh, look, totally. I used to ask him about miking up amps, and I remember we were recording some demos at a little studio in Castle Hill, and he just sat in the room with me and was just playing with the volume controls on my guitar. And he said, let's just take it back a bit just so that we get the nice distortion breakup. And he was getting all technical about that, and he pulled the best guitar sound. And I'm thinking, I've got to remember what he did, so that I can replicate that. But, when we were touring and driving in the van, and, he just had the most wicked sense of humour, and we just used to laugh all the time. Like, all of us, the whole band, would be just in stitches most of the time, and he just had this way about him that he, in his that typical English way, just to crack people up, and it was just great fun.
Off the top of my head, a lot of these memories have been flooding back over the past couple of days. I've got a couple. I remember being at a Rod Stewart concert in Sydney, so it would be around 92, and Alan and John are drinking at the bar, and always had time for a chat. There was another one, at Canberra Airport, flying on from the Alice Cooper support. Just wonderful memories. But I know that from chatting with you, you saw Al on one of those reunion shows in 2013. What was that like for you? To see Alan up there on that stage, a completely different environment. A guy you'd shared so many stages with over the years, in front of a sold out, adoring crowd.
Yeah, look, it was amazing, and just to listen to Quo playing, the 4 of those guys, you just reminded you of why they were such a huge band, because no one plays boogie like them. And, they just got together. They didn't rehearse that much to do the tour, and it was one of the early gigs I was at in London, and it was just amazing. And because I was living there, Dale, Al's wife, contacted me and said, look, if you want to come to the gig, let us know. So they picked us up in the van, took us to the venue, and, I thought, my God, these people are just unbelievable. And that was Al organising it. And then we went up backstage and hung out with Al while he was getting ready for the gig. And I got a couple of good photos with him as well. And I hadn't seen him for quite a few years at that stage. And he wanted to keep on talking. We just, were, talking about all the past years and all the stuff that had happened in the meantime. And it was just phenomenal. And just seeing him get up and play, and, he was starting to, struggle a little bit. But it didn't affect his playing or his singing or just the ability to button down that rhythm section. It was just unbelievable. And Carol and my wife and I walked away and just said, oh my God, that was almost, it was just the most amazing experience seeing those guys play. And I just regard myself as being so fortunate, because, Rick passed and now Al's gone. So we'll never see that lineup again.
Agreed. It's such a wonderful thing that happened. And
totally.
People don't realise how frail he was on those shows, but he still persevered and really let no one down.
Look, that's just character. That was his character coming through there, mate. There's no doubt about it. Al was a tough bugger, and he was a lovely guy. But if anything ever went pear shaped, I'd want Al in my corner, 100%.
I've heard he was a bit of he was good with the fists back in the 70s. Rick Parfitt shared a couple of stories, which I read a while back.
Yeah, look, we did some training too. When we were doing the Bombers tour, I used to get up and run most mornings, and Al would often get up, and him and I would go for a run, and we'd do some training and some martial arts training and stuff when we'd stop to the park or something. So we did that quite a bit especially in the earlier tours we did, and he was just really keen. He just loved that side of it, and Al could use himself, no doubt.
Mate, I'm going to let you go. I will get you to close out with one or two lasting memories of Al. I think you posted a video which is very poignant, you know, that the phrase "some things last forever but nothing stays the same." Yeah. Just very, very poignant.
Look, you know, that song, when I first heard that song, I thought, what a wonderful song it is. And, of course, Alan and John and John Swan wrote that song. It's not my right, but I've always loved the song, and I just thought I really want to sort of just say something about Al or even to Al, you know, to his spirit. And just, I think that song was kind of sums it all up. And although I think that was about him leaving Quo and John leaving the Angels, it still kind of rang true with him passing. And I thought, well, you know, is this the way to say goodbye to a friend? And I thought, well, I think it is. You know, this is it doesn't really get much better than that, where he actually wrote the song and those lyrics are his lyrics. So, you know, it's amazing.
Next up, we're going to hear from the great Kevin Borich, who, of course, spent a number of years in the Party Boys and played with Alan during the band's most commercially successful time period, which was around 1987 and 1988, as did vocalist John Swan, whose powerhouse vocals add so much to that material. I caught up with both KB and Swanee quite recently. KB's history with Alan goes back to 1976, when the Kevin Borich Express did a run of dates opening for Status Quo. And after the chat with Kevin, we'll hear my interview with Swanee straight after.
Hello.
Hey, Kevin, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. Mate, as students of Australian rock and roll will know, in late 76, the Kevin Borich Express did a whole run of support dates on Status Quo's Blue For You tour of Australia and New Zealand. Was that the first time you'd met Al, or had you crossed paths before?
No, that was the first time, you know, and they were great. I remember actually going from Melbourne to Sydney to do the show, and we were in an airplane. And how could you forget this? We're flying along, all of a sudden there's some turbulence, and we had this huge drop, you know, where your stomach ends up in your eyeballs, you know. So I always remember doing that, but those shows were great. And, you know, Quo were just such a fun time rock band. You'd see the classic audience all going up and down to the beat, that throb, you know, when you see those big ones, especially at Wembley or something majestic like that. It's just a wonderful thing, and they had that going on, and they were a lot of fun to be with. So yeah, that's the first time I met them, and of course the Party Boys was the last times that we were playing together.
Mm-hmm. Mate, you've just released a wonderful tune featuring Russell Morris titled Call a Friend, which, as I've read from the bio, is all about loss of communication with those special friends that, you know, traverse our lives, but who you lose communication with, and too many times, time too late, or you find out those friends are not travelling so well. I know that song was penned before Al passed, but when I listened closely to the lyrics this week, wow, it's a powerful reminder of the fragility of life. It's a wonderful song, mate. Call a Friend.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's amazing how the germ that started that song has turned into the bigger things. You know, that's what's so great about writing, when you write something and you somehow strike a vein, and by accident, and it flowers into more meaning, and people that tell you got a meaning to it, and you go, gee, I wasn't thinking of that at this time. But I guess that's the magic of things, how they evolve.
Look, I don't want to get too off track, but I do want to focus a little on the Party Boys today. Was it evident early on that there was chemistry within the group during those first rehearsals?
Yeah, and it was camaraderie, you know, like fun and playing the songs and knowing what Alan had been involved and achieved, and wanting to support it as good as possible through your input. So, you know, that's how bands get together and get the right meaning and their intention, you know. So, a lot of fun. And of course, having his accent there as well was a lot of fun because, you know, at the time that was the Spinal Tap time. You know, did you ever see the movie Spinal Tap?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was so funny because I went to the movies and we were there and we knew it was a send-up, but a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
And we were laughing, and some of the heavy metalers in there are looking at us like, look, we don't know what's going on, but they didn't know what's going on.
Well,
it was a classic.
I spoke to Al a couple of years back. He agreed with me that working with guys like yourself and John Brewster really did rejuvenate him and just what he needed at that time. Although he will forever be tied to the wonderful legacy of Status Quo, his time period in the Party Boys really was a special time for him, I think. Yeah,
he was out of the band through legal stuff, I suppose, was going on that I know that he would tell me a lot about because I had some too, and so it was perfect for him really because he could get back on stage and do what he loved doing, playing songs that he loved and meet new people, which was us, and create great friendships. You know, like him and John Brewster, they were backgammon fiends, and they would be playing before you went on stage. There'd be the two gentlemen playing calmly playing backgammon.
It's great,
and yeah, they were very close, and we all became much loved with Alan, especially when he started going on about the food that was provided for us backstage, and it was just like a scene from Spinal Tap. You know that scene?
Yeah.
Because he had the right accent too.
Alan, had a wonderful wit and a fabulously dry sense of humour. Any funny moments in particular which stand out that you can share?
Yeah. It was, and when I went towards the last times I saw Alan was when I'd go around there for dinner with his lovely wife, my friend Annie Wright, and his lovely wife Dale, and we'd have dinner, and he'd get the ukulele out and start playing old English tunes or anything, and of course we'd jam quite a bit, and also he had a sound system, and I'd plug into it, and then he'd have some of his new stuff that he'd be working on, and I'd have a go at putting some guitar on it, and just in his lounge room, not sit in the studio. It wasn't serious stuff, but it was a lot of fun. We'd end up on the balcony, and it was just so wonderful, and it was all about enjoyment and connection. It was great.
Mate, I would like your take on Alan from a musician's perspective. As someone who has played with some wonderful bass players over the years, what was it like plugging in and playing with Alan that very first moment? I mean, he was so damn loud and would make any venue thump. I guess, what things did he do as a bass player which made him so special, so solid and reliable?
Well, that was what you mentioned, the word solid. And that music, that style, it requires straightforward, no flowery stuff, but rock bottom. And that's why you had those people in those crowds going up and down. Of course, the drummer was on board with that, and that's what propels a multitude of people to feel the same thing. It's simple and it's straightforward and it's done very correctly, and to create that groove.
Alan had a great rock voice, but, vocally his range was very wide. Off the top of my head, the recording of It Could Have Been You is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, he did, and he loved doing it, and he commanded the stage when he was doing it too. He was a strong character when it came to doing what he loved. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He told me he was quite nervous the very first Party Boys show in Fern Tree Gully, I think it was, which is interesting.
Well, that would have been because he hadn't been on stage for a long time. I mean,
close venue.
It's just like now. We haven't been on stage for a long time. We're in lockdown, baby. And it's kind of like, what did I used to do?
Yeah.
So he would have been feeling like that, and like we are now. And it's kind of like you're dying to do it, and that's what you do. It's like a racehorse that's there's no more racing. You're conditioned to do what you do, and it's been taken away. And that he had that situation through different circumstance. And so really being with us and getting up on stage there, he would have been feeling a bit the thing about it. But of course, as soon as the music starts, you just lock in.
During that time period, 86 to 88, did you and Al ever co-write any material together?
I think we did. So actually, Swanee reminded me. I've forgotten. I think one of the songs that was on it that I forget the name of it now. Swanee told me that we were working, but we like backstage and stuff at sound checks, things would start popping up, and we'd end up going off on a tangent, on an idea. And I found that sound checks actually bring up quite a few, I call them germs, that are ideas for songs that come up that may sort of start pestering you to finish them, They're their own are they their own entity?
Yeah. One positive thing which I enjoyed about all the Party Boys records, not just the big seller from 87, but on all the albums, was that it introduced material which may have been familiar to many, but not to everyone. And case in point, something like Gonna See My Baby Tonight, to a whole new generation, myself included, were first exposed to that via that self-titled Party Boys album. That's a wonderful discovery. Yeah,
well, see, I'm actually didn't think of it from that aspect, because I guess when you've written it, it's just there, and it goes in the past. But new ears, virgin ears, I call them.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm after virgin ears, especially at this time of life, and so it's a wonderful thing. So that's one thing that band did, was represented a song that got very popular into the top 10 of way back of mine. So it was a wonderful thing for me, even though I didn't realise that it was happening.
I chatted with engineer David Quinn earlier this week, and we were talking about the just released Live at the Tivoli Sydney 87 desk tape recording, which I think is amazing. There's a phenomenal take of Don't Let Go on there, and I think the energy and power of that song is captured so well on that desk recording. It's so pleasing that recording has seen the light of day.
Yeah, I must get to hear it. I haven't heard it yet.
Okay.
That song is it's got the element of a bit of Quo in it, and it's not a bouncy one though. But it's got that rock solid stuff that people can connect with really, really. If I'm just wanting for something to really ground things, that's a song that I pull out to play. Because my songs are pretty diverse, as you'll begin to learn even more when I start releasing my duets album next year. I haven't written a few on piano, so they'll be coming from a lot of different areas, which will surprise a lot of guitar heads. That because it's there's always guitar in it, but the piano takes you in another zone. I found anyway. So if you can pick up any instrument, any different instrument, and you've got a different field to play.
Can I ask, out of curiosity, was Don't Let Go ever considered to make the cut on that studio record, or was it always going to be Gonna See My Baby Tonight?
It's usually always Gonna See My Baby Tonight, for the obvious reason that it was, I think maybe it got there just because it sounded good. I didn't have a decision to make on that.
Okay. There's another great track on that desk tape I just mentioned from 87, which I really think is one of Alan's best, one which he co-wrote with Keith Lamb way back when, called Driving Me Crazy, which was the renamed Quo tune Over the Edge. Just a wonderful vocal there from Al, and very much emphasises what I said before about that vocal versatility, I think. Yeah,
well, whatever, he had strong ideas, and he could back them up with his talent. So, he knew what flavour he was, and you just do the best you can, and he would deliver, because he was a strong character, even though he was a gentleman,
Yeah.
But his core, he had a strong core, which is a wonderful thing, because, and he wasn't egotistical, as some people are, So that's a wonderful attribute.
In closing, is there one lasting memory of Alan which you'd like to share, something which you'll always carry with you?
I think that obviously the last times I saw him, it was to do with music, but just in his lounge room and on the balcony, where he would launch into things and had that smile on his face of eagerness like a kid, like anyone who loves music. You're always reminded that you were a kid, or you are a kid, and internally you're still alive. That's what music does. Music does that. It's a wonderful thing. The kid is still alive inside you when you start enjoying music. And that's how I'm going to remember him and his lovely wife, Dale, who was so supportive for him, especially at the end times when he was starting to feel his health problems.
Hey, Swanee, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. How are you doing?
Very well.
Earlier?
Mate, so I would like to start, if I may, by making mention of some very touching words you left on your Facebook page about Al, which stated, "I will always love our time together. Alan Lancaster, bass player, gentleman, father, husband, star, end of an era." You've managed to say so much in so few words there. End of an era, indeed.
At the end of an era, yeah, and many, many ways, mate. You know, people who have, on a world stage, conquered greatly, not just a bit, but greatly, over such a long period of time, and came here and was so humble with it. You know, did you get to know Alan well?
Not terribly well, but just from a fan's perspective, he always had the time of day.
You will see that's Alan. That's because we were all fans of his, and he treated people like they were fans. He treated people like the way that he'd like people who were big to treat him. You know, because he had some run-ins with some people who were quite big, which I won't mention, but and you know what, you learn from things like that. Alan's one of those guys who had that decency of coming from a London background, you know, raw son, you know what I mean, lovely, want to buy a watch, got a new motor, you know, that type of thing, East End of London, to absolute stardom, and also battled his way through the whole of Quo. It was, the whole thing was continuous battle. I mean, I don't think we should labour on that, but it's well-known fact, you know. But I think that through that, he's learnt that, you know, it's not sometimes just, sometimes it's not just being part of Quo, it's what you learn from being part of Quo, you know, or people like that, you know. A lot of people went down the drug way and the drink way and all of that. Alan didn't go down any of that, you know.
John, I guess an obvious question is, where and when did you first cross paths with Alan?
Oh, God. Would have been one of the Status Quo tours we supported, you know, in an earlier shape and form. I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember the year, unfortunately.
That's okay.
If it comes to me, I'll text you. I've got your number now. So
Well, people tend to forget in this modern age just, you know, how damn hard bands toured back then, and much of Quo's Australia's success can be attributed to the time they put in performing, you know, back in the 70s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, there's guys who are, you know, they do a 10-week apprenticeship on The Voice.
Oh, yeah.
That's just, to me, that's sacrilegious. And what are you going to learn in 10 weeks? Because, I mean, you get people like me who are offered to go in there and coach and stuff like that, and they've had some fine coaches. I'm not picking on the things, but I think it's more about the judges than the contestants. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's just so different, though. I mean, if you think about what you mentioned before, just the wealth. I mean, how many passports did Alan fill up? I mean, it's just incredible. But, you know, Fraternity, before you joined ranks, as you'd be aware, did some touring with Status Quo in 73. It never ceases to amaze me how many branches of that rock and roll family tree are intertwined. Did Al ever regale you with stories of those fraternity gigs?
Oh, yeah. Don't forget, I was with Jim Keys and people like that who were all doing those tours. They were over in London at the same time. So London was a big brotherhood of music. It wasn't so much that everybody was famous then. Hendrix went into, I think it was, the Marquee or something, and asked Clapton if he could have a blow, and Clapton says, "Oh, what key do you play in?" If you look over the charts in 1965, 66 onwards, every song that was in the charts was different by a different act, and they all sounded different, and they came from different backgrounds. They came from working class stock. They weren't just, being from working class stock was something you tried to get out of. Not that's what I disagree with and I know diverse, but I disagree with the rap generation, all that, and calling women whores and they're trying to be gangsters and all of that, That's no way to do it. You don't encourage kids. Encouraging kids was to be a mod or a rocker. You were one or the other. You were from Carnaby Street or Brighton,
Well, I've always thought, John, when Alan joined the Party Boys and working with guys like yourself, and I chatted with Alan in great detail a couple of years ago about that time period, and he agreed with me that working with guys like yourself and John and KB really seemed to rejuvenate him, just what he needed after the split from Quo. And
they drained him. And to be honest with you, the Party Boys was not an easy band to work with, because there were so many egos involved in it. And they were egos that didn't have the integrity that Alan's did with Quo. They shouldn't have been messing about with that sort of stuff, because Alan had done all of us. They were fucking bigger they sold more records in Germany than most of us sold collectively in the whole of Australia, not Germany, let's pick Frankfurt,
Well, something you mentioned early on about Al being humble, and one thing I'll always remember about Alan is just how humble he was, very down to earth, a very down to earth man who, although successful, remained grounded and treated everyone within his world, be it fans, band members or crew, with courtesy and respect. That's a wonderful thing. Not many people have that quality, do they?
No, I don't know too many. And those who do, it's either insincere as fuck or they're so up themselves that they can't, they can't see the tree. I was going to say the trees for the forest, but they can't see the forest for themselves, because it's all about them and getting themselves ahead. Guys like Alan would bring things to the table that made things like the Party Boys be successful, He bought the fucking studio to do the recording in, and it was a great time, because him and John, they hit it off like they were like sisters, the two of them would just carry on together like two girls. They were really happy, and John had finally found an intellectual equivalent that he could look up to.
Great chemistry.
Yes. As opposed to, there is nothing wrong with Doc. Please don't misunderstand me. But Doc was a bit like me. He was a hard to fucking deal with person, and a much more intelligent person than myself as far as academic stuff goes, but not necessarily rock and roll. And I couldn't let John away with that shit. But neither would Alan. Alan would educate John and drag him along, and then you'd slowly see John changing. And when I joined the band, one of the conditions was that if they were going to be a floating band, that I wasn't interested in being part of, who's going to be in the Party Boys this week, that they had to start treating it like a band. And the first person to put his hand up was Alan. He said, and absolutely, couldn't agree more, Let's fucking get this together and make it a serious thing, And Paul Christie may have a slightly different version of it because he usually does to each one of us.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a reason for that. It was Paul's baby. It wasn't actually Paul's baby. It was Kevin's baby originally. And because Kevin took Paul all around America and toured with him, and he was Kevin's bass player. And then when they came back, they put the Party Boys together. Of course, Kevin was he was the heavyweight in those days. Paul was just a lightweight bass player. And as it moved on, they brought in anybody who was a fucking star, And I thought, well, I don't want to be in a band of stars. I don't want to be in a band of musicians, who take their music very seriously. Nothing more serious than Alan Lancaster standing on stage with his legs spread going, ta-dum, 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 and his hair going, and that fucking big smile on his face, the mustache, the effect that had was, the words don't explain it. Look at a picture and you see a whole, the person, the way he came across to me, You'll see a few on Facebook at the moment, and it's all usually the same stance with a different bass, same smile, same hair, same mustache, and same guy that's inside there.
Sleeveless black shirt.
Yeah, to the fucking absolute max.
Yeah.
He's having a great time, he's in his element.
Love it.
Not too many guys get to be continuously in their element, especially in a band where there's ups and downs like Quo,
A couple of songs, if I may. Is This the Way to Say Goodbye? One of the strongest on that self-titled record, written by yourself, Alan and John. Can you recall how that one came about? Yeah,
I had the lyrics and I just sat down and I've just re-recorded it the other night.
Really?
I did because it's a tribute to Alan. I want to put it.
Oh, wonderful! Lovely.
I want to give it to Dave and Alan, little Al. And say, listen to the words of this. This is what we were talking about, because that is, for me, about saying goodbye to a friend, a particular friend. And at the time, it was a huge loss. I just lost my crew, two of my crew burned in the accident. But when I lost Alan, I suddenly realized how much I had gained and learnt from working with and for him, because he was really easy in the studio to work with. He made everything that you do feel like you'd done great, and then he would get you to do something else, which was exactly what he wanted you to do in the first place. But he made you think that you had come up with it, And we were all pretty good musicians, so we were fairly versatile with what we could do. We could give you 5 or 6 different, versions of that same line, and he already had one in his mind, and he got through the 5 of them until he got the one that he was looking for, and then he said, "That's it, thank you," And wow. I loved that, because he never tried to say, "Nah, do it like this, governor," He wasn't that man. Where John would try and do that because he's more of the teacher, the authoritarian. Alan was very, very easy to go in. and John would be, "Oh no, you got to do it like this. This is where fucking George and Harry did it." I worked with George and Harry. They didn't do it at all. They said, "Get in there and show me what you got. Give it every fucking thing." I'd come into the studio and stand there, because I was going to be the singer with Flash in the Pan. I don't know if you knew, but one of the Alberts bands I was going to join was them and possibly AC/DC. But the thing was, I would put a vocal down and I'd come in and I'd say, "I've gone flat there. That doesn't sound right," And George would lean back in his chair and he'd go, "What are you talking about? Sound right? You're depicting exactly what the lyric is saying. You're frustrated. You're angry. It's not about pitch. It's about the emotion behind the word, that you're delivering. You're performing like an actor in that song." Bond personifies it,
What about It Could Have Been You, written by Al and Dave Skinner, first released by you as a 7-inch in 85? I told Alan a couple of years back that I think it's one of his best ever vocal performances. I mean, the man sure could sing when he wanted to, couldn't he?
Yep. And he took his time to do it carefully. Well, he was never that'll do. That would never do. It had to be right. And I admire that, because there's too many people just, what they do is, I had never heard of freaking auto-tune or anything like that, and it was only after all the working with those guys because none of them used it. If you were a bit flat, that was part of the nature of the beast. It personified the emotion behind the word. And if you listen to Born, it's cheeky, it's arrogant, it's streetwise. Now, if you're going to be all of that, you cannot be articulately correct as well. And your vowel pronunciation, it doesn't get to that technical side of singing. It's the emotional side of singing. The technical side is Nat King Cole. Bond's the fucking street guy,
Well, Alan's vocals from memory could go quite high when he wanted to. I know that there's a desk tape from the Tivoli '87 just been released. My God, if anyone ever needs a reminder of just how powerful a band the Party Boys were back then, they need to get a hold of that recording. And again,
who was the singer in that? Was I singing in that?
Yep. Al sings on Driving Me Crazy, which was a rebadged Quo tune over the edge. Just incredible.
Yeah, and we all had our little bits. See, I can't remember a lot of it because I've got to be honest with you. They put up with so much shit from me for drugs and alcohol, and I'm a Glaswegian. I'll fight at the drop of a hat, and I'll start an argument in an empty house. But I couldn't argue with Alan because he's the type of guy that you would argue for.
Yeah.
Not against. You don't argue with. You argue for him, Anybody says anything bad about him, we'll have me or jump. At 70-year-old, I'll still fucking do it, mate, Because he meant that much to me. His integrity was so good. As a gentleman, look at Dale. Look, she is exactly, you will see why she's Alan's wife. She's a ballroom dancer. She's a lady. She's from, let's say, that 50s, always got her makeup on, always stature, the walk is always carried properly. The skirt's a perfect length. Nylons, hello, never even heard a word of that until I met her again. But that was the type of woman she was. So you can imagine the gentleman that went with that she fell in love with.
Oh, that's well said. Well said.
That was probably as close as what I can get to giving you an understanding of how much love there was in that family. It's a different type of beauty. That beauty came from the 50s. It was within. And the woman was a lady.
That's lovely to hear that. Lovely.
Well, that's what Alan was. He's a gentleman. He belonged in that era.
Mate, can you recall the song Rising Star? Again, co-written by yourself, Alan and John. Great song. From memory, Rick Brewster does the solo in that. Lyrically, I think it's one which I've always thought runs a similar line to, say, Foreigner's Jukebox Hero.
It's very simple. Yeah, it's a little bit like that, yeah.
What's the background to Rising Star?
It's just Rising Star. It's just what... That was so typical of my writing in those days. If you listen to Is This the Way to Say Goodbye and Rising Star, they're very much Swanee style songs. But I had the benefit of other people to take me in a direction where it was not sounding like a Swanee song. I had that wonderful connection that you have musically, where you give up your ego for the betterment of the song, and every time it worked with those guys. And I say those guys, but it was mostly Alan. He'd be sitting at the desk, I'd be sitting behind with a bottle of scotch and a couple of lines of coke, and he would turn around in his swivel and he'd say, "What do you think of this, John?" And he'd go, and I'd go, "Yeah, sure, I'm honest." So I'd go in there and, I'd do exactly the same thing I'd done before, and he'd go, "Yeah, that's not bad. Just give us another one with a little more of the, less of the Alex Harvey and a bit more Paul McCartney." And I got it straight away,
Mate, musically, you've played with some wonderful bass players over the years, some of the best. What do you think Alan had which made him so rock solid and so, I guess, great at locking that rhythm down?
Well, there's only one Alan Lancaster. There's only one Status Quo. You listen to that. I was standing, as a kid, I was about 10, and I'd be leaning up against, in the coffee lounge in Elizabeth, which is a sort of notorious place where the kids hang out. It's a bit like Happy Days, And the jukebox would be on there. And it was around the time when Black Knight and all that sort of stuff, Pictures of Matchstick Men I played in my first band,
Yeah.
And it was such a great thrill. One day I was talking to Alan, I said, I'd really love to do this song one day. He said, I think I wrote that. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. I'll see Del when I get home. I went, what? I thought it was somebody like the Young Rascals or somebody from, because you forget that the guy was in the biggest band in the world at the time, and no matter what, you can't, but he allowed you to forget it. It wasn't important to him unless you disrespected them, which was a different kettle of fish, because he's a very proud, and as I said to you, that 50s, 60s man, I would say early 50s, he had integrity. He was a gentleman. You'll see it in the Sullivans when he lifts his head up for that ad, that look of like pride and joy in his family, as that's Alan in everything. He brought that to the table. And it's very hard to, no matter where you come from, ignore it, because you recognize it as authority, wisdom, and knowledge. They knew what they had been to places we dreamt of going to.
I know you've got 1,000 Alan Lancaster memories. Is there one, before we close up, in particular, which you can share with us, something which you'll always remember him by?
Oh, he's just the sweetest man I think I've ever met. I don't think I've met anybody sweeter than him. My wife, I went up and told her, and she broke her heart. And she said, why? And I said, don't, he was sick. She said, yeah, I know, but he's just such a beautiful man, Now, Kevin's a beautiful man, and I'm sure people would say, I'm a beautiful man and such a beautiful man. But there's a difference, because I was saying to you before about the 50s and that, I don't want to harp on that, but there's a certain charm that comes with being a gentleman. And when you're a gentleman, it's all the way or nothing, I can turn the gentleman on and off. I can become a street hoodlum real quick, as you've heard in my vernacular earlier on. But the same token, he was always maintained that certain composure, dignity. He also gave people credit, Tyrone and people like that. He made them opportunities that they would never have got, and they were fucking great. Well, Bombers were a great band, But, I mean, I think the combination of Tyrone and Alan was the making of that, because I think Tyrone was like he was really looking up to Alan. Alan really sort of dragged him up to another level, And there's not too many people with singers like him, and I say it humbly, but myself, who I go into the studio and listen to them telling me what to do when they don't fucking do it themselves, Like they sing flat and they want to put melodone and stuff on it, and you put melodone on my voice and I'll fucking scrub it off the tape, Take me off the tape. And Alan would say, you don't need that shit, just take a breath, slow it down, don't get excited, don't listen too much to them, and this is somebody calming you down from when you're in the studio trying to do a final vocal. Do you know the type of man that is?
Yeah.
That's a man who can see somebody else's pain. And Alan had that ability. He could see somebody else's pain. He could also see their pride, their what made them what they were. Because he was quite a very deep man who had been to very great heights and was unaffected by it. I mean, don't forget, he was Alan Lancaster from Status Quo, so he had those characteristics of coming from a successful background, but he didn't flaunt his wealth. He didn't walk around fucking like, Status Quo, all that sort of stuff. I got that from the other guys, from Francis and, what was his name? Rick, yeah, they gave me a hard time like you wouldn't believe, But with Alan, he was like one of my heroes, Francis and Rick, I told to get fucked many a time. But,
Look,
but that's another story. You know?
Very well said. And I have mentioned this earlier that I have my own memory of being at a very early Bombers show at Crow's Nest in '88, and I'm standing there with a friend, and 2 sets, mid-set, Al walks up to us, doesn't know me very well, but walks up with a drink and says, "How's the sound?" So after some small talk for 5 minutes, he walks away. My friend says to me, "The man opened up Live Aid and he's asking me how's the sound."
Yeah,
just wonderful.
See, the ability to make people feel comfortable is an asset a lot of men don't have these days.
That's one of the reasons why I want to do this, because to have the memories and recorded of friends and people who worked with him, I think is going to be everlasting. So I thank you again for this.
Oh, look, it's an absolute pleasure. These words do not for 1 second pay homage or justice enough to the love that I feel for Alan and his wife, and his son, who tried so hard to emulate him. It's just hard when you're a unique character for someone else to emulate, even your son. Yeah. But he'll get as close as he possibly can within the realms of reality.
What a wonderful way to end our chat, Swanee. Okay. Mate, have a lovely evening, and I'll be in touch. And thank you again.
Please stay safe.
That's the Party Boys there with the track Small Talk, which you'll find on their self-titled album released back in 1987. As many of you will know, the drumming duties in that particular lineup of the band were shared by former Divinyl Richard Harvey and Paul Christie, who'd previously done time in both Mondo Rock and the Kevin Borich Express as well. Paul recently shared with me some wonderful memories of Alan, as did David Quinn, who did some of the engineering on that aforementioned Party Boys record. David would also go on to work with Alan and John in the Bombers as well. We'll hear the interview with David straight after my chat with Paul Christie.
Hello.
Hey Paul, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Bad. Yourself?
I'm not too bad. Thank you for giving me some time at such short notice. I interviewed Alan a couple of years ago in great detail, specifically about his time in the Party Boys and the Bombers. And we covered quite a lot of detail in our conversation together. I guess joining the Party Boys seemed to rejuvenate him, really what he needed after the split with Quoro. Would you agree?
Oh, totally, because he came to the fore. It was just the best therapeutic treatment he could ever have because he was doing what he loved. And so I gave up the position of playing bass, and that's when I had the notion. I thought, I've got an idea. And so I got Richard Harvey from Divinyls, who I played my first ever live show with in public, and who Bob Clearmountain, one of the world's greatest record producers, think Roxy Music, Brian Ferry, the list goes on and on. When he was engineering the Divinyls for the producer, it'll come to me in a minute, not really relevant, but anyway, Bob Clearmountain had a word to the producer, and then the producer said to the Divinyls in the studio, whilst Richard was inside and their manager, they said, Rob Clearmountain said, "Well, whatever you do, don't lose that drummer." He said, "He's one of the best field drummers in the world. I know because I've recorded all the rest of them."
Wow.
Which was Andy Newmark, all the Kings, Steve Gadd, all these guys. He'd recorded all these guys. And he said, "Never lose this guy." And it actually kind of freaked those guys out, especially Mark and Chrissy, because all of a sudden Richard was given a position of some power and respect for what he could do, and because they were always squabbling the Divinyls. It was just like it was a hilarious comedy show. Listening to Mark and Chrissy fight, it was just crazy fun.
And I guess that's
anyway. I said to Richard, I said, "Look, I'm going to put a lineup of the Party Boys together. I want you in it, and it's going to be Lancaster, Brewster, Borich, and Swanee. And I said, and I was going to play bass. He said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to be sitting next to you on a drum kit, and all I'll do is play time. You play the fills, I'll play the time. Or we'll both play time. And he went, yeah, right, huh? So that's how it came about. And I spoke to Andy Evans, who had a drum shop in Sydney in Surrey Hills in the 80s, and he's a great drummer himself. I said, I need a kit. And I said, I need a big, loud kit. And he said, well, you know, Neil Gaynor from Simple Minds came in yesterday and just dropped the Tama kit in the shop and said, can you sell it? And because Tama were giving him kits left, right, and centre. And so I said, well, how much does he want for it? He said, oh, mate, he said, you'll probably get it for like $800. He said, it's worth thousands. He said, he just wants some cash to go and buy some hookers and booze. And I said, well, tell him I'll buy it. So I got this fantastic Tama kit, and it was beautiful. You know, it was gloss black, and it had all the new skins, and it was as loud as I'll get out. So that's how it happened. And I said to Richard, I'll just play time. That's all I'm going to do. Occasional toms, and that's what we did. So there was a massive wall of drum beats, and Alan actually looked to it like a duck to water, and he didn't say anything, but you know, Richard Harvey as a rock drummer had infinitely more feel than John Coughlin, but John Coughlin's his style sort of, that's what drove Status Quo. But there was much more swing and groove going on with the two drummers, and then Alan just, all of a sudden he worked out, this is really good. And so there was this incredible sort of rhythmic platform for Brewster and Borich to sit on top of. And it was a really, really great band. There were some moments that were just really quite spectacular.
I think that's a bit of an understatement, saying it was a great band, because just phenomenal, world class.
Yeah.
Playing the pubs. Let me hit you with one, and this is something else I told Alan. I think that the track, It Could Have Been You, right up there with, I think, one of his best ever vocal performances, and that includes his recorded work with Quo. Would you agree?
Yeah, he did. He because when he was out of the Status Quo kind of network, and he was being Alan instead of he was being Al, and not Alan Quo, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
Yeah, he was being Alan, and so he had much more space to move in, and he had a much more flexible environment. Having said that, it sounds like I'm suggesting that Status Quo could only do one thing, and which kind of was their thing, really. And when they were doing it, it was just immensely great. You know, I actually, when he joined the band, I went back, and I think I got on YouTube and I was watching what they were doing, and I thought, these guys are really good. You know, it's just rocking. You know, really cool. No Prisoner, hard rock downstroke guitar playing was fantastic. You know, so but Alan, you know, he was sort of perched between these two drum kits on risers, getting bass drums up his little arse all night, and lots of big noisy snares. And Richard and I just be looking at each other, just smiling and laughing half the time. We're having so much fun, you know. And I had this regimented routine that I said just before we went on, most times I said, "Righto, Richard, drop him," and he'd drop his pants, and I'd give him a vitamin B shot, and I'd give me one, and off we'd go. We'd be like epileptic rabbits, you know. Oh, it was so much fun. And Alan would just turn around and he'd just be like smiling, and we were just like, you know, ripping into it. And but always on the back of the beat. We always tried. Richard naturally sat on the back of the beat, and so I just followed him. You know, like instead of back, it'd be bat like that, and it just, we could have just played. You know, sometimes we there's a few times when we just sort of played for like 2.5 hours or 3 hours. No one wanted to stop. We'd play Roadhouse Blues for about 50 minutes, you know, and do all this stuff. just because it was just so much fun sitting on that groove with Alan especially. And in that post I put up, I don't know whether you saw it, but I just think that he is probably one of the... There's an elite few that are rock pick bass players, and he's definitely in the top, in the top 5, and because he could just keep it rolling and grooving, and it just had far more aggression than playing with your fingers, But having said that, Robert Torello in of course I'm having a mental blank. Metallica. He kind of debunks that myth altogether. When he gets going, it's like fucking incredible. But all in all, it was a really sort of audacious thing to do, and in some ways it was just, I had a band, but I wasn't in it. And I thought, no, that's not working. So I spoke to Andy, I got this drum kit, and off we went. And we played together. We played constantly, like 5 nights a week for 80. And then when the single came out and went number 1, it just went loopy. And we just played and played and played and played and played, and it just got better and better and better. And then we got invited by AC/DC, principally because we had a Scottish singer and we were hard rockers, and we did the Blow Up Your Video tour. And they specifically asked for us, and that was really great.
You did February '88. I was at one of the Sydney shows, and
it was fantastic fun.
Another gig which I want to mention just off the top of my head. You did a show at an outdoor show at Mona Vale with Graham Bonnet
down the road from my place.
Yeah, Graham Bonnet was on vocals. Phenomenal day. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've got some photos of that. Just a couple, and I remember there's so many people there, and Mona Vale Road was kind of choked, and it was just like causing chaos and mayhem, but everyone was having a great time. Those AC/DC shows were fantastic, and I was really lucky that I asked these friends of mine, I think that were ABC guys, I said, could you guys come along and film it? And they came out with 2 16mm film cameras, and they recorded it on film, not video.
Wow. And
it just looks freaking great. It looks like it's our show, And that was just one of the best tours I've ever done in my life, because they were really kind to us. They just gave us everything. That's it. All the lights, all the PA, all the fallback. Didn't need any help. We just went out there and we fairly stuck it up their asses.
It was good, and from memory, I think it had been maybe 7 years since they'd been in the country. But from memory, Paul, and I won't take up too much of your time, that self-titled Party Boys album was produced or co-produced by Alan and John Brewster. Did you pick up anything from Alan with regard to production work?
I just let them be. In fact, I didn't go to the studio at all, because I just said to them, this is what's happened. I said, when we were in Adelaide, I met a guy called Andy. His surname will come to me shortly. And he worked for SA Brewing, West End beer and all that sort of stuff. And he saw us play in Adelaide, and I said, Andy, I'm going to record a single with the band. We're going to be probably pretty good. I said, and the aim of it is to have a top 5 or hopefully a number 1. And I said, so I'm looking for a sponsor, and we'd sort of brand the single cover, and we could have launches of the record, all this sort of stuff, and just tie everything in. And he said, great, I'm in. He said, how much? It was like, that was it. It was a 30-second conversation. And I said, oh, mate, it's going to work. You know why? Because we just did a deal without any pain in 30 seconds. And that record went to number 1. And so...
It did. I've got a cassette copy right here in front of me as well.
It's fantastic. So then what happened was we did all these launches, and we did a launch in Sydney, and I think we did one in Adelaide. We did all these launches every year for the single. And Andy was, he said, "Mate, I'm hearing a song on the radio all the time." And he said, "I've got the single in my hand. It's got West End beer on it, Yeah. He was so pumped up. So every launch we did, this semi-trailer, I kid you not, this semi-trailer would arrive with booze. There was more booze than you...
than you could drink?
There was more booze that all the people at the party, as a band and the crew and everyone, could drink in a month. And it was just like the booze everywhere. So, and I said to everyone, "Take some home." So didn't we get good press? People walking out with cartons of bloody wine and journos with 2 cases under each arm. It just worked. It just was so hilarious. The whole payola scam. It was just giving away free booze. We got more write-ups than nude photos of Bridget Bardot on the paper. Honestly, it was incredible. So
mate, I know that this is a tough one for to highlight one or two special memories, obviously with a bandmate and somebody you did so much travelling with. And I know that Alan told me that you and he travelled to London to do some promo for
we did
for the single.
Yes.
If there was one lasting memory of Alan Lancaster, something which will always bring a smile to your face, what do you think that is?
There was a saying. There was one thing that I always remember him for, is when we walked on stage in Sydney, which I think is where the AC/DC tour started. I think that's where it started. Yeah, and we're just about to walk on stage, and he's going, chaps, we have to have a talk. We have to have a talk. And I heard Richard the drummer go, "Oh fuck, here we go again." "Yeah, what do you want?" So get in close. And he's looking at everyone, and we all thought he was going to leave the band. Or something serious was going on. And he says, listen to me, chaps, and he's speaking in his English, in that accent, and we're all huddled around. We're going, "Okay, Alan, spit it out, hurry up, we're on stage." And he goes, chaps, let's play like we've never played before. Good. We walked on stage like pissing ourselves laughing. And the crowd must have thought, these guys are going to play like shit. They're so pissed. And we were laughing and laughing. I've never forgotten that in my life. Let's play like we've never played before. Good.
It's wonderful.
So we went out and just smashed it and had a great time. And so he was a very funny little bugger. And in winter when we were touring, he'd always be yelling out, "Black ice!" Like, that's what they do in Britain. They see ice on the road and they yell it out and they slow the car down.
Mate, thank you very much for coming on at short notice. Thank you for your time and helping to piece together these memories for Al.
Yeah, bless him.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
See you, mate.
See ya. Bye.
Okay, so we're joined by David Quinn, who, you've got a great history in Australian music, but we've got you on the phone today to talk about Alan Lancaster's passing. Obviously, you were part of for those who may not know, you were part of the Party Boys crew and worked as their sound engineer, among many other tasks, I imagine. So I guess the first question is, how does your involvement begin with the Party Boys?
That's a bit of a blurry one, really. I received a call from Bob Hunt, who was the Party Boys tour manager at the time. The sound engineer who was prior to working with them prior to me had to go off on another tour. I was familiar with the sound company, with Revolver Audio from Waterloo, Lee Conlon's company, and basically my first gig was at Corrimal Leagues Club, I believe, down at the bottom of Bulli Pass, and I think that would have been in mid to late 86, I don't know, yeah. And I worked solidly with the Party Boys. I think the first gig, actually, Angry was still singing with that particular lineup, with Brewster, Lancaster, KB, Richard Harvey, and PC. And it was the very early days of the two drummers, basically. It was in the first couple of weeks. I think Angry just did a week till John could start. I'm not exactly sure. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the first gig, Coronable Leagues, it could have been Whale Beach.
Okay.
I know they're beach suburbs, but look, we did so many shows. It's very hard to, without an itinerary in front of you, it's very hard to pull back it's just you generally only remember the bad ones.
Well, people forget that just how vibrant the live circuit was, in days gone by, and just in a couple of things I've read online in tributes to Alan, particularly over in European press, they have pretty much skipped over his time with the Party Boys and the Bombers, which I thought it's part of the reasons I want to do this, because it's a big part of people like myself and obviously yourself who worked with the band. I mean, my gosh, the amount of touring you must have done. What about your first memories of when you met Alan? You mentioned before we started chatting that you were weaned on Status Quo in the 70s.
The funny thing is, a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who also works in the entertainment industry, used to live next door to Alan in Rose Bay. When Alan first moved to Alan and Dale, not long after they were married, the first house was in Rose Bay, and I casually met Alan as a 19-year-old chatting over the back fence, and some 5-6 years later, and working for him. So he was a very personable sort of chap, and he always made you feel, one of the lads. He was very much a lad himself, and he never sort of took the high ground, which he often could because of his status as being a former member of Quo. I mean, Quo were one of the biggest bands to tour Australia back in those days, back in the late 70s. Alan had a very sharp, dry wit. He would always make you laugh. And, he would never let things, even though as serious as they might have been at the time, doing, in the recording side of things, I don't think he ever lost his cool. I never really saw him lose his cool. John and Alan used to always sit out in the front office and play backgammon while I was doing overdubs, and keeping the coffee going.
Well, in terms of being a sound engineer, obviously you're hearing that rhythm section, and you went on to work with the Bombers as well. How does he stack up? Obviously, one of the world's premier rock bass players, but I mean.
Alan is a phenomenal bass player. He just locks it. He makes it easy for the drummer to stay in the pocket because he's right there with them all the time, and he's pushing that. He's always pushing, and the drummer's always trying to lay it back. So there's that little tug of war going on, but it's still all in the pocket. It's a wonderful thing to listen to. Richard Harvey is probably one of Australia's greatest drummers. He's a great four on the floor rock drummer, but he's got all the chops to play the great shuffle feels, which is very similar to John Coughlin. John was very much a shuffle drummer, like Mike Beard from ZZ Top. both Coggo and Richard are up there in that caliber of, you know, the all-time great shuffle drummers, you know. I think on an interview just recently too, I was looking back on Alan, and he gave John Coghlan the same praise, basically, that you know, Coggo is a very unique shuffle drummer, and we were so lucky to have him in the band for the time that we had. It was really sad that Coggo had to leave the Bombers. I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't privy to exactly what the business was. That might be a question for Tyrone. But I think he had to go back to Australia because of visa reasons. Back to England from Australia. He had his partner here with him as well, and we just basically done the recording at Feathers and mixed it and got the heads of agreement back from A&M in London and New York, and you know, historically, you know, got received the highest recording advance that I'm led to believe that it's the largest recording advance of any band in Australia based on that recording, Australian recording history, and that's, you know, pretty impressive, and I'm very fortunate to be a part of that.
From a recording perspective, and I spoke last night to Jason, who runs the UK label Barrel And Squidger, who released the posthumous Bombers Live album. And in front of me, I'm also looking at
I'm still waiting for my copy.
Big bum. Okay, I heard that.
I'm still waiting for my copy.
Jason, if you're listening to that, give me an email and I'll put you in touch with David. But just recently released was the Party Boys live at the Tivoli from 1987 as part of the Australian Road Crew Association desk tape series. Just wonderful that this has surfaced and seen the light of day, as is the Bombers recording. And my gosh, I mean, I used to love seeing the Party Boys because it's there's so much power and energy through these tracks. I mean, Livewire is just phenomenal. Obviously, the Angel stuff works so well, but my greatest memories are of standing very close to Alan, watching him, you know, roar through Roadhouse Blues. It's just those images and those memories are going to live with me forever. So, David, can you talk a little bit about this Tivoli live show, this from the desk?
Look, it was the night of the
was that the launch?
The premiere launch for the album launch was on CBS. All the industry was there, and it was a full house. And I can just tell you that from the beginning to the end, it was just an action-packed, you know, no holes barred, pedal to the metal, you know, Aussie pub gig. You know, it's like you can't get any better. You've got Swanee, you've got Kevin Borich, Alan and JB doing their thing. I mean, Alan's version of Tobacco Road is awesome.
Phenomenal.
And the highlights with Alan, you know, with the Party Boys, one of the best images and memories I have of the Party Boys is we did an event outside in Wallara at a restaurant called Prunier's Gardens, where we played under it. I don't know if you are familiar with the outdoor hockers, you know, the big white tents. You know, set up in the park. Well, the bass player from Dire Straits, John Eldersley, at the time was starting a foundation called Life Education about harm minimalisation and education about for kids in school and preparing them for after school and early adolescence and educating them about, you know, the follies of drugs and so Life Education, you know, basically was looked upon as a great vehicle to promote, you know, good healthy living and and to be coming from such a successful icon as John Eldersley, we were asked, the Party Boys were asked to participate in the launch of Life Education in Australia, and it was a gala dinner event at one of Sydney's premier restaurants, at Premier's Gardens, and the greatest memory of that night, shortly before the power was pulled by the police because they weren't informed about the gig, was watching Hazel Hawke and Bob Hawke and Margaret Whitlam and Gough Whitlam and Paul Keating and his wife and all the power brokers of the time, Kerry Packer, John Singleton, all dancing in tuxedos, to Rocking All Over the World.
Wow. What a wonderful story. Wow.
and I will never forget that day. And the Commissioner for Police was there at the time, and this young constable comes up to me at the mixing desk and goes, "You've got to turn it down. It's after 10:30." and I said, "Mate, it's up to you. It's like if you pull it now, there's your boss over there on the dance floor." And he still pulled the power, so I'm pretty sure his name was Constable Jobsworth, because the power went back on and we got to do another couple of songs.
Great.
Yeah, all for a good cause. Yeah.
David, I should wind things up, and I do thank you for your time at such short notice. Is there one lasting memory of Alan Lancaster you'd have over the many, many gigs you played with him?
The best memory I can give you is basically that Alan was the ultimate professional. He never had a bad night. He never had an exceptionally good night. He was always 100% consistent, which is what you need in a bass player holding down the rhythm track. Holding down, as the the cement between the bricks. It's like Alan was the catalyst. I mean, he was the perfect bass player for that lineup with John Brewster as rhythm guitar player and Richard Harvey as the timekeeper. PC second drummer was awesome because it was a bit like having someone who could play, shuffle grooves and shuffling hi-hat feels and things over 4 on the 4s, stuff that you wouldn't normally find.
No, an extra dimension, isn't it?
Yeah, well, just playing the top part of the kit,
Yeah.
and adding extra fills and, recording He's Going to Step on You Again, the John Congus track. That was pretty much all Alan. He and John Brewster produced that track, and I was involved. I was brought in because the band didn't want to play to a drum machine. They wanted a jungle rhythm that they could just use in consistency with the original track. And basically, I got called in to replace the producers at the time to follow their vision, basically.
Yeah.
And I was really taken aback to be called in to do those sessions. Sort of, even though I had quite a bit of studio experience, I'd never worked in that studio before, and being thrown in the deep end like that, it's either sink or swim. And fortunately, I paddled enough to get to the other side, and we ended up with a hit out of it, and 2 hits: Hold Your Head Up and He's Going to Step on You Again. But the other great tracks on that Party Boys album are the versions of High Voltage and Gloria Is Just the Way to Say Goodbye. There's a load of great tracks on that Party Boys album, and basically it all came down to Alan and John calling me in, basically, and that led on into the Bombers after that.
It could have been you. It could have been you from that album. It has always been my possibly my favourite, or one of the favourites on that album. And I chatted with Alan a couple of years ago, and I mentioned it to him. I think it's one of his top 5 vocal performances, including all the work he did with choir. And he told me the the background story behind it, just phenomenal. But Gloria, as I've said to other people, I remember playing that at the time. It's very, very, it's got a real grunt, AC/DC type grunt of when Gloria starts out, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Kevin Borich and John Brewster, guitar players, I mean, you just, you know, I've had some wonderful experiences working with Kevin in other lineups and whatever, but again, it's the concrete in the clay, you know, it's the concrete in between the bricks, and that's Alan and Harv, you know, and once they lock it in and there's a groove, it's absolutely rock solid, and you know, they're relentless. They can just go for days. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. What a great way to...
you know, they can just go for days, you know. They just lock it in, and it's just like a good old Valiant, you know. It's like...
Before you go, I will just mention the website address is australianroadcrew.com.au. Tons of great desk recordings which are surfacing, and if I really do encourage anyone listening to this to get a hold of the Party Boys live at the Tivoli from Sydney in '87. The Long Gong Tivoli, like so many other venues, it's probably a car park or a shopping mall now.
Saw so many great shows in that venue.
Yeah, me too.
To do the Party Boys album launch there was a big coup in itself. It could have been at Stallions at Parramatta. It could have been at the Carrying Bar Inn. It could have been at the Blue Gum. But no, we got, you know, the premier venue in town on George Street, the Tivoli. I always remember Sam Riggy coming up to me after the show and with Dennis Hanlon. And Dennis goes, "Gee, Dave, just like the record, you know." and Sam just turned around and goes, "Yeah, and Quinny, you don't have to go flat out the whole show." So it might have been a little loud. I had a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a loud engineer, but I don't think anyone walked away that wasn't smiling.
Oh, and it makes you smile now. It's just such a wonderful recording, mate. Thank you.
And just
sorry,
one more thing, Dennis. I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
Just with regards to the Arca desk tapes, all proceeds from those recordings get distributed back to Road Crew in need, okay, through Support Act, our premier industry charity.
Wonderful.
Okay, so it's very important that particularly in this day and age when our industry, which is not even acknowledged as an industry, is completely shut down through COVID, we need the support, and the best way you can support Band and Crew is by supporting the desk tape series, the Road Crew, and that additional support for musicians through Support Act. But that's the vehicle how we get how Road Crew, who have had, you know, a lifelong career in the entertainment industry, who didn't get to make a lot of superannuation, who didn't didn't really do it for anything other than the love and respect for the artists that they work for. They're really falling on hard times, and this is a perfect vehicle to assist. And there's loads of great music. This week, I think we just released Ian Peel from Black Box Records released Ignatius Jones, Jimmy and the Boys.
Great.
I'm just trying to think of the venue. It's on the website.
AustralianRoadCrew.com.au. Bands make it rock. Roadies make it roll.
That's right. Absolutely.
Mate, thank you again for your time today and sharing some of your memories of Alan, of your time working with Alan Lancaster. Really, really means a lot. My pleasure. Alan is is just going to be missed. You know, he's a dear chap, and my condolences go to Dale and Alan Jr. and his brothers, sisters, and all the rest of the family.
it's a sad day for all of us.
Thanks again, David. I appreciate your time this morning.
My pleasure, Dennis. Great to talk to you.
Recently released as part of the Australian Road Crew Association's Desk Tape series, that was the Party Boys with Driving Me Crazy. Alan, of course, handling lead vocals and sounding absolutely superb. That track is lifted from the Live at the Tivoli in Sydney 1987 release. Roadies really are the backbone of the music industry, and if you dug that, head to australianroadcrew.com.au to purchase your copy. It's a wonderful release, and as I've mentioned, is a great reminder of just how much power the Party Boys could belt out in the live environment. Now, a couple of years back, there was another wonderful posthumous live album released, and this one from 1989 is quite special to me, as I was there that night in April at the Crow's Nest Hotel in Sydney. That was a great pub that was part of the live circuit back then. I didn't miss too many of those Bombers gigs at that venue and was pleasantly surprised to see the release of this live recording. The album was released via Barrel And Squidger Records in the UK, which is ran by lifelong Quo fan Jason Hodgson. At the time of the album's release, I did chat extensively with Alan, which you will find on show number 121, where we talked in great detail about this album and indeed his time in both the Party Boys and the Bombers. It's a fantastic album, one which really captures the band at the height of their powers. I recently caught up with Jason, who shared with me how the live album came about, how he became a Status Quo fan, and as he was involved with Alan in the release of this album, Jason also shared some wonderful memories of Alan as well. Let's hear that now. Thank you for coming on the podcast and chatting with me at such short notice. And for those listeners who may not be aware, Jason runs the UK label Barrel And Squidger, who a couple of years back released a wonderful live recording of the Bombers from Sydney circa 1989. Lovely to chat with you, mate.
Oh, great. Thanks for the call.
Mate, sadly, it is the passing of Alan Lancaster, which is the purpose of our chat today. His passing has been felt by fans all over the planet, especially those who have been lifelong Status Quo fans. You know, knowing that two band members from the band's classic lineup have now gone, it is going to take a while for that to sink in, isn't it?
It is. It's shocking, yeah. I mean, everybody knew that Alan wasn't in the greatest of health, which was obvious when we saw him on stage, you know, in 2013 and 2014. But when Rick went, that was a massive, enormous shock for everybody because, of course, he was still very much part of, you know, the current status quo. But, yeah, you know, as fans and collectors, you know, we look back at all those magnificent Quo records and Quo appearances and, you know, the original four of them, what they did together, and to know that two of them are gone now, it's, you know, it's a full stop, isn't it? Yeah, it's a real shame.
I did start our conversation by mentioning the posthumous Live Bombers release a couple of years back. May I say congratulations on releasing that. Obviously, with the recent passing of Alan, bringing that project to light and highlighting the Bombers at the height of their live powers is incredibly important. How did you become involved with the releasing of that live album?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm involved with the official Status Quo fan club that's called From the Makers Of, and every couple of years we have a convention at Butlins in Minehead, which is where the Spectres, the pre-Quo band, first met Rick Parfitt, and, you know, it's kind of known as the birthplace of Quo. So we all gather there every couple of years. And the last couple of times, Alan has from Australia to join us and, you know, have a bit of a Q&A session and a sign-in session, and then join in with John Coughlan's Quo as the big finale, which were, you know, incredible things to be able to witness. The last time Alan came over, he wanted to bring some product with him. He didn't want to come, you know, empty-handed. He wanted something there for the fans. And he discovered these live tapes from the Bombers days, and he sent them to John Eden, the old Quo producer and engineer, who sprinkled some magic dust on them and made them sound absolutely phenomenal. And he suggested that it was just given away as a download, a digital release to the people who were at the fan club. And Yvonne, who runs the fan club, said, this is too good for that. You know, we need to make a product plus, you know, the
the demographic of the Quo fan is somebody who doesn't really do digital music. You know, they'll want a physical product. So she put Alan onto the convention's sound and video manager, man, and he was going to look into just knocking up a few CDs, but with the kind of print run they were looking at, it would just have been like a greenback CDR. They got Dave, the graphic designer, involved. He started working on the sleeve, and at one point, all three of them to Alan independently. This needs to be a proper release. You know, it's not fair to it. It's not right. It's just, you know, put out from a knocked together CDR. You know, it should be done properly. Now, of course, I've been connected with Franklin for a long time, and I'd set up my own record label to put together the Rock Remembers Rick Parfitt charity EP, which was a number 2 physical singles chart hit in the UK in 2017. So I already had the infrastructure set up. I'd already worked with John Coughlin on these things, and, you know, pushed it via the fan club conventions and everything. So they thought that it would be a perfect fit for me to get involved in producing a physical product. So they all suggested it to Alan. Alan said, whatever you think fit, you know, go ahead. So they put me in touch with Alan. And I said, it's a magnificent recording. So I want to put it out on vinyl and CD. I said, let's make some real ultra-limited collected items out of this. So we did... we ordered 100 copies each on red vinyl, white vinyl, and blue vinyl. And in the end, because of a production issue, completely out of my hands, we didn't quite get 100 of each. I think there was something like 82 red and 95 white, something along those lines. So we took those down to the convention at Minehead, where Alan and John and Bob Young were doing a signing session, and we sold them direct to the fans there. And everybody
sold out
over the 20 quid. Yeah, we had an allocation for the convention and another allocation that I put in the online shop, and the bundles in the online shop sold out in 7 seconds. Wow. Which Alan was incredibly chuffed about, because he wasn't sure how much of a demand there would be for it to sell. We did a decent number of CDs, so we were able to keep selling CDs for several months afterwards, and then we repressed the vinyl on the picture disc, and we're down to the last box or 2 of those now.
Yeah, you really did do an amazing job, and I think so you've still got some picture discs available if fans want to get a hold of those?
Yes, there's still a few. They're exclusively available from the Barrel and Squidger shop, which is musicglue.com/Squidger. Speaking personally, I would really like to see those go to the Alan and Quo fan, because at the minute, as always happens when somebody passes away, you get a few, you know, ghouls and resellers and flippers coming along, snapping things up, and that is happening. So, you know, Quo fans get in there quickly.
Yeah. And, mate, what's great about the album, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you before when I spoke to you a couple of years ago, but I was at that the recording of that gig, which makes it even more memorable. In those early days, and it didn't show up on the recording there, they used to do Roll Over, Lay Down, second song in. Just incredible when they're playing in a small pub in Sydney and the place just used to jump. It's just very, very wonderful memories. I could get lost down that path. I won't. Mate, I guess an obvious question is, before I move on, is how and where did your love of Quo begin?
Just as a school kid, really. You know, everybody was aware of Quo. They were constantly in the charts. It was when I was about 15 or 16, I think. Just a group of school friends were having around the town centre one day, and the market hall had a large second-hand record stall, and we all decided we're going to all go and buy a record each, and I bought a 7-inch of Whatever You Want and put it on the record player. Loved it. Went back the next day and started buying up some more old Quo 7-inches, and I've never looked back. Great. Now I've got I have about 3,500 items in my Quo collection. Great. It's a wonderful journey. That's it. It's by no means the biggest Quo collection out there. You know, there's other people that I'm very jealous of.
You know, outside of the UK, countries like Australia always embraced Status Quo. They did numerous tours here starting in 73, lots of chart success as well. You know, they still played on golden oldie radio stations here. They were the soundtrack to a generation of teenagers here, especially in the 1970s. I guess that's another reason why the news of Alan's passing has filled so many of us with sadness. But Jason, you did mention the reunion dates. So you did manage to get along to see Alan with Quora on some of those reunion dates, and what were they like?
I did 10 of those gigs in 13 and 14, and the first gig was Manchester Apollo in 2013, and it was the only gig I've ever been at where the crowd were more nervous than the band. Now, there was a group of us gathered outside the venue during the afternoon listening to the sound check, and we couldn't believe what we were hearing coming out of the stage door. You know, we were hearing Blue-Eyed Lady and Oh Baby and April Spring Summer on Wednesdays, and these tracks that Quo had never, ever performed live. You know, and we're thinking, my God, we're in for a treat tonight. And then there's a pub just around the corner from Manchester Apollo, and we were only there, you know, for a few drinks before going in. Everybody was just so apprehensive, because it was an opening of Pandora's box, getting the original band together, and it was either going to cement their position as one of the greatest rock and roll bands in the world, or it could have been awful and destroyed their legacy, and we just had no idea which way it was going to go. We knew, coming from the Quo camp, that they were already regretting the lack of rehearsal time that they'd had. You know, Francis was already saying, you know, we put 2 weeks aside for it, and we should have put 2 months aside for it, or words to that effect. So we were all nervous, but we went in the Apollo, and there's the curtain with the enormous Hello silhouette on it, and the tape of Jackie Linton doing the intro as from the live album, and the curtain falls down. I've never heard a roar like it, really, you know. The crowds on those tours were unbelievable. I think the gentleman from the Times said that he's been to thousands of concerts at the Hammersmith Odeon, and it was the only time he'd walked through the back door and not been able to take another step further forward. That's how densely packed the crowd was. And it's possibly what Quo crowds are like in the 70s, but they certainly haven't been that intense for many decades.
You know, it's just incredible, and in some ways extremely fortunate that with Rick's passing in late 2016 that those reunion dates happened. I mean, dreams can come true, can't they?
Absolutely. And what a dream it was for me. I mean, I'm not old enough to have experienced the Frantic for the first time round. My first gigs were in the late 80s. So, you know, I've always been fully aware of the fact that Alan and John were the creators of what I was watching in the late 80s and the 90s. You know, those formative gigs for me as a youngster. To actually see Alan and John in action was incredible. I mean, we've been able to see John with his own band, you know, playing at relatively small venues around the UK for quite a while, but I don't think Alan had actually been in the UK doing anything Quo-related, probably from... Well, I believe he was in about 87 promoting the Party Boy single. And then, I could be wrong, but I don't think he was back then until the Hello Quo movie, Alan G. Parker's documentary film came out, which was 2013. So, yeah, there was an awful gap where there was, you know, Alan was never in the UK at all.
Did he tour? I have a vague memory that he toured. You probably would know, with a version of Lancaster's Bombers in the UK mid-90s. I'll have to back that up, but didn't happen.
Never. No, he toured Scandinavia.
Okay, that's Sweden, that's it. Scandinavia.
2 or 3 times, yeah, but never Britain. And of course, the Bombers studio album was never released in Britain either. The only post-Quo thing that ever came out was He's Gonna Step on You Again as a single. The Party Boys album never came out in Britain. It did come out in mainland Europe. And the Bombers album, all the singles, were never released in Britain at all. I was backpacking throughout mainland Europe in summer of '92, and I managed to pick up Aim High in in Germany and Holland, but we knew nothing about it in Britain.
What were your thoughts on the Aim High album when you heard it?
When I first heard it back in '92, I was still a youngster, and the way that I listen to music is completely different to the way that I listen to music now. So I remember giving this a couple of spins and then moving on to something else. But when I first heard the live recording 3 years ago, I was absolutely blown away by it. It was phenomenal. What a performance.
Yeah, definitely. And some, rock and roll royalty in those ranks. But, mate, what's the latest news with your label? I do note that you released a single from John Coughlin's choir titled Lockdown quite recently. How's that been selling?
That's been absolutely fantastic. We went straight into the official UK physical singles chart at number 2.
Wow.
And I was absolutely gutted because I thought we'd done enough for number 1. I had to... I found John as soon as I found out about the chart position, and John hasn't been in the British singles chart since 1981. And I said, John, I'm sorry, mate. I'm sorry. I'm gutted. It's number 2, and I wanted number 1, and I thought we got number 1. And what was so unlucky was that the number 1 wasn't actually something that was released that week. It's just the way the chart's put together here. If you take pre-orders, then it's only when the orders are fulfilled that the data goes through to the chart unit. So it was actually Hayley Williams, who's the frontwoman of Paramore, had pre-sold an EP about 4 or 5 months prior, and after lots and lots of complaints to a UK record company, they had finally sent all the stock out, and it just so happened it was the same week that we were out there. But, yeah, we looked at the top 5 that week, and it was 4 multi-billion-dollar multinationals. And Barrel And Squidger Records at number 2.
What an achievement, though. I mean, a hell of an achievement, right?
Yeah, well, unbelievable. I mean, this label, we've released 3 singles and we've had 3 top 10 hits. Been number
Wonderful.
2 twice and number 8 once. So hopefully 4th time lucky we'll get that number 1.
What's in the pipeline for the label?
Very little at the minute, and the reason for that is mostly the pandemic. People haven't been able to sit in the studio and record the material. I did have some things lined up where musicians who were very busy with the day job with their main group, but were doing something on the side as a solo artist, they would have handed that over to a small label such as myself. They had to look after, while they were doing the main job with the main band. But because they weren't able to get out with the main band, they've just been looking after the side projects themselves. Nobody can blame them for that, it's just the sign of the times. And the other problem is getting vinyl manufactured in Europe at the minute. When the UK record companies shut down vinyl production around the mid-90s, they scrapped most of the machinery. Some of it went out to Eastern Europe, and that's where the majority of manufacturing capacity is now for Europe. I'm being quoted the best part of 9 months waiting time to get any vinyl manufactured. So we did well with the Lancaster Bombers releases, getting 4 different vinyl versions, but we wanted to do the John Coughlin's Quo Lockdown single on vinyl. And because it was a topical song, there's no way we could have got the stock in time. So we had to do that as a CD single. So I'm open for business with CD products, but it will be a while before we can start getting vinyl together again. It's a real shame. Alan was talking to me about doing some projects with some other material that he was discovering, side projects that he'd done and other bombers. Such like he had some rehearsal tapes with himself on lead vocals instead of Tyrone Coates. We were discussing him getting those things together, but then COVID-19 happened, and then obviously, for a while, Alan wasn't well enough to work, so that hasn't happened.
It is wonderful that you went from being a fan to actually doing business and developing a friendship with Alan. Not many people get to do that, do they?
No. It was very. It was a real privilege and an honour because these people have been almost mythical figures, especially with Alan being in Australia. He's just, never seen anywhere publicly in the UK for so long. I've just dug out this picture that was taken by somebody of myself and Alan sat on the sofa backstage at the Quo convention, and I'm quite a big guy, and Alan, as you know, was quite petite, quite a small fella. But when you saw him up on stage, as the lyric goes, he stood there like a giant with a guitar in his hands. What an enormous presence, what an enormous character he was. Just an absolute privilege, as I say, for a fan to end up working with him and bringing products to the Quo fan base.
Very, very well said, Jason. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast today and for sharing some of your memories of Alan Lancaster. And once again, great work on getting the Live Bombers recording out as well. Many of us here in Australia hold that band close to our rock and roll hearts, and it's a wonderful album. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate that.
Taken from their 1989 live album, released a couple of years back on UK label Barrel And Squidger, that was the Bombers there with a blazing take of the song Crime Investigator. Okay, next up, we're going to hear from some friends of the show, Ron Clayton, Steve Mascord and Leigh Wilson. Steve, who used to write for publications like Hot Metal and On the Street, among others back in the day, interviewed the Bombers not long after their formation and has some great stories. Leigh saw Status Quo on their tours of Australia in the 1970s and was asked to run their fan club as well. He'd also previously ran the Suzi Quatro fan club. Leigh's got a great rock and roll brain and shared some cool memories too, as did Ron, long-time roadie and keeper of the flame for the Ted Mulry gang. There are some links between T.M.G. and Quo, and I caught up with Ronnie quite recently to look over some of those. Let's hear from Ron now, which will be followed by my interviews with Steve Mascord and Leigh Lemmy Wilson. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine.
That's the way. I am piecing together a bit of a tribute for Alan Lancaster. I just thought I would ask you a couple of questions. I know that there is a little bit of a link with T.M.G.
I didn't really have... I only actually had never met Alan until a couple of years ago, but I had spoken to him back in 1977 when he got in touch with me. But, I had no... unlike a lot of bands that actually supported Status Quo, I'd only ever been a member of the audience, so, they had an immense effect on us musically.
That's right. So you were there with, you went to Randwick in 1973, is that correct, with Slade?
Yes.
Did you go,
yeah.
You went with Herman, I imagine?
Well, it was, I'm not sure whether it was Herman, it was Ted, Les and myself, because it was early in the year, it was January, I think. I'm not overly sure whether Herman went, but it was Les and Ted and myself. We were surprised actually at the point because Slade were top bill, but they went on before Status Quo because apparently when they did New Zealand, Status Quo had gone that well that when Slade came on, people were walking out, so they reversed the role when they came to Australia.
They'd switched it around. And I think I read a comment of yours online, Ron, recently that it had quite a big impact on T.M.G. And I guess that from memory, I think the Let's Do It Again song from Steppin' Out was, I believe, inspired by Quo.
Yeah, well, so, there's a lot of them. Look, they formulated the sound because we did a whole year virtually doing cruises on the Ocean Monarch and Northern Star, right, Shore Savile, which was an English ship with an all-English crew, and they had a lot of music on the ship that hadn't actually been released in Australia because, there was nearly a 6 months gap sometimes between Australia and England. But, we picked up a lot on Caroline and particularly... Paper Plane and all them things, and they all became staples in TMG's earlier years. I mean, as you know, they continue to this day to still do rock and all over the world. But yeah, I mean, the sound was. I mean, you only have to listen to T.M.G. and it's got that similarities. I mean, all the record reviews used to say we were copying, but you know, I think the sound comes about and it sits right and it works. But there were quite a few songs. Let's Do It Again. I probably is more pronounced, but there were a couple others that were almost dead set rip-offs.
T.M.G. used to do Backwater from memory as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It was that was up until about 1970, mid-1976 when the Strutting album came out and they started doing a lot of their own stuff. But yeah, Backwater was a staple up until that point.
And you mentioned recently that in 77, when Alan was visiting Australia, he rang you to offer his services to assist with the production of the T.M.G. album.
Yeah, we were in between managers. But apparently Alan had seen the band a couple of times.
Really?
And was rather impressed. But when he found out they were recording again, he was offering his assistance to want to engineer or produce, but it didn't click because he was here on, you know, and he went back to England because he was still living in England at that point.
Mm.
He hadn't moved here, so the timeline didn't actually work. But then again, I don't know what year it was, but it was much later on, and before T.M.G. came back on the road, Alan had approached Herman and was interested in doing a T.M.G. Quo show, you know, so we'd have the three guys from T.M.G. and Alan would just slot in as the singing bass player.
Wow.
Which I think would have been a great concept. That was probably after the Bombers and Party Boys, but it was just another thing that Alan was interested in doing. But by this point, he was having a lot of trouble holding bass. It would have been exceptional, I think, just a one-off tour like that. But it didn't come about. You know, it's ironic that it's rather funny, I think, but we had a big fan base in New Guinea, and they didn't like Status Quo because they thought they sounded too much like T.M.G. and were stealing T.M.G's sound. I thought it looked really good when Strutting was sitting at number 3 on the New Guinea album charts, and For You Blue was at number 4.
Wow. You know, you've obviously seen so many bass players over a long period of time. Ron, how do you rate Alan Lancaster in terms of just, you know, the glue, you know, holding the band sound together?
You know, I'm not a musician, so I'm really not in a point to talk about it, but I think that the solidness of their sound, of course, has to be attributed to him and John. You know, I think as a unit, you know, they were pretty good. I've never looked at Alan as a bass player or whatever. I mean, he's just a member of a band, but you know, I guess he's way up there with them, with quality bass players.
Yeah, mate, my kind of background with Alan Lancaster is actually I'm a bit of a Luddite. I guess I'm a bit of a Luddite as far as Quo are concerned. I kind of discovered Status Quo late and probably never really fully discovered them. I only ever scratched the surface. Maybe now I'll go and listen to more. But as a kid, you know, the first time I went to a licensed premises to see a band that wasn't like, you know, a singer-songwriter in the pub, you know, I guess singing other people's songs actually, was I went to see the Party Boys at Harbour Workers, and they're obviously very exciting to see a live rock band for the first time. And so, you know, when I heard the news the other night about Alan, I didn't go back and play Quo. I went back and was very pleasantly surprised to see what Party Boys stuff was on
Spotify. There was a couple of albums. There was a live album and stuff like that, and a couple of studio albums. So that was my point of reference, I guess. And yeah, it kind of I was very sad.
Well, I guess that's an important part, because for many of us, particularly in the 80s, Alan's time period in Australia was a huge part of our upbringing and our gig going experience. You mentioned there that your first show was the Party Boys, and from memory, if I think back to that self-titled album, the production which he and John Brewster did was really heavy, and I recall playing that, and it kicks off with the Van Morrison cover Gloria, very, very AC/DC like, you know what I mean? It kicks off quite loud and heavy.
Yeah, and John Swan's voice is awesome. Some of the best stuff that Swanee ever did, and I was so young, mate, that I kind of wasn't. I wouldn't be able to confidently say at that age that I could tell which songs were originals and which songs were covers. I knew Gloria was a cover. You know what I mean? I knew a couple of others covers, but it was all new to me. Sticky Carpets and Schooners of Beer and Amps, and the Party Boys were kind of, they were there on sort of day one for me. So that's kind of why it was, it was quite poignant, when I heard the news. And, I read an obituary, I think it might have been in The Guardian, where they said that, the Party Boys were quite successful. And then there was the Bombers, and I remember one of the first times, it hasn't happened that often in my entire life because I never really made a career of it. But one of the first times I was ever backstage at a festival was in Wollongong when they had the Bombers were playing. Sunny Boys, I think, might have been headlining. They're playing at Wollongong Showground, and they had the northern end there, which is now this entertainment centre, but back then it was an old kind of covered market area, old brick, falling down, and that was where the bands were, and that's where all the dressing rooms were, and I still have the C90 cassette with the interview I did with the Bombers, that day, and I just remember Alan being a really nice guy, and John and obviously Tyrone Coates, if you've had on your show once or twice, and I believe he's on this show, and I remember they all played a game of cricket, and it was all sort of ineffably glamorous to me, being backstage at this festival. So, the bomb, going back to the obituary in The Guardian, they said that, the Party Boys were very successful, the Bombers were reasonably successful, and then after that it kind of didn't go so well, but that's not the way I remember it. I don't remember the Bombers being commercially a very, big band. They were very much fringe, and I don't really remember at the time much of a difference between the Bombers and Alan Lancaster's Bombers, really. But I just remember, Alan being always around and always, getting up and playing with other musicians at various gigs I'd go to, and yeah, it's just sad,
Okay, so that incident you're mentioning there at Wollongong, that show with a bunch of bands, the Sunny Boys and the Bombers were on, is that where the article stemmed from? I remember you did an article on the Bombers. I think it ended up in Duke magazine. Was that as a result of that interview?
I think I did an interview with some, at Festival Records. Then I think I also did an interview down in Wollongong at the festival. Strange enough. So there were two interviews. Maybe one was on the phone, and one was in person. And I recycled the stories across, various joints that I was filing for. I might have even got a few parts in Kerrang over here in the UK on it. And I think you actually you had one on kind of a memory drive, and you sent it to me or gave it to me, and I think I've posted it in a couple of places, and the Hot Metal website's kind of down at the moment. So it just, it was a great time to be alive.
And can I ask you, mate, as you've had an affinity with the UK for a number of years. It's obviously your home now. It gives you a different perspective on the enormity and just how much success Status Quo had. And I've mentioned that before to a couple of people that, from a musician's perspective, Alan Lancaster had very much climbed the top of the mountain. He could have just rested on his laurels and retired when he quit choir in '85 after Live Aid, but no, he didn't. He joined the Party Boys and then gave all his he put all his energy into a brand new outfit. It says much about his love for music, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and Status Quo massive here. They and the original 4 guys are revered, and it was on the obituary of Alan was on the sort of front page of the Guardian and front page of when I say the Guardian, I mean the digital version, but it was very prominent in the British press here, and there's no any snobbery there might have been towards Quo, being that kind of somewhat kind of basic boogie woogie. It's died out. You know what I mean? In a way, I think slowly the snobbery towards AC/DC in Australia has died out, and that now it's kind of it's respected as a huge part of the musical canon of this country, and this is obviously a much older and bigger and with respect culturally more impactful nation than Australia. So that is that's Alan's place in music history, and it certainly was definitely a loss that was felt beyond me on a Sunday night in our lounge room here. It was obviously felt by a lot of people in this country.
All right, so on the phone we've got Leigh Lemmy Wilson with us, who's a friend of the show, and I've called him up obviously because he's got an extensive knowledge of, besides Australian rock and roll, hard rock and heavy metal. He was, I believe, and Leigh, you will correct me, you ran the official Australian Status Quo fan club in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Why don't you start by telling us how you first became aware of Status Quo and how you got involved with a fan club?
I was working in New Guinea with TAA as a traffic officer in New Guinea. And when I came back, I broke my contract. When I came back, I met up with my old mate, Simo, who I met in 1969. And I told him I'm back. He picked me up. We went around to this bloke's place. And he had a few records. I brought a few records back with me. And one of them happened to be a band called Status Quo and Dog of Two Head. The first song come on, and it was Umli Tongue, as Francis Rossi said, instead of Umli Tongue. A really unusual name for a song, but I can't even remember what the meaning was. But as it turned out, we played that album, and then from then on now that was February 1973, and then I started just collecting, went back and looked for the original albums, Mark Kelly's Breezy Spoon, etc., newspaper clippings from cuttings, and then they toured in September 1973. They toured Australia. Now that was the second time in 1973 they toured, because previously they had toured early in the year. I think it was January when I was still in New Guinea, so I didn't know anything about the band. And it just went from there. And every year when they toured from 1973 onwards, we just went to every single show and camped out, even 1978, up to 1978. And after that, it slowed down for me because the direction changed a bit, but I still love the band. So 1978, I got hold of the fan club after the first show at Festival Hall, which was July 31st of July 1978. I'm very good on dates. And I was asked by this girl next to me in the front row, the bloke that's organising the tour merchandise wants to know if you're interested in running the official Australian Status Quo fan club. And I said, immediately I thought about it and said, yes. Okay, what do I do? Okay, so
just let me pause there, if I may. So why did she? Was she aware that you're a big fan?
I think she. I can't exactly remember the girl, but she knew me by name because back then I was called Leigh.
Yep.
The Lemmy didn't come into it until 3 years later because of Motorhead. And as it turned out, she just looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're Leigh, aren't you? You're a big Status Quo fan, obviously. You're in the front row." And then she asked me, and that's where it went from there. But I got a feeling this girl might have had come down from Sydney, because there was a girl in Sydney that had already seen them, apparently. I think they might have played Sydney before Melbourne and then Adelaide later, because all the tour dates in the program were all wrong. The tour dates were wrong in the program. So we found that out when we got the merchandise after the show, and that's how it started. Pulled up the station wagon after the show and loaded it up, and it was huge. I think they wanted to try and get rid of a lot of the stuff. I think they just come out with too much merchandise.
Okay, let's go back a little bit, if we may. So you mentioned there were 2 tours in '73, and from memory, I think the first tour in '73, I think they played with bands like Lindisfarne and Slade as well. So it says a lot about. People in today's day and age just are unaware of just how hard-working the touring circuit was, and how many bands were out there doing it. I mean, that's 2 visits to Australia in the 1 year. And of course, they'd go on pretty much from memory. I mean, they were back in '74, '76. You saw them in '76 with Kevin Borich?
Yep, I was there. And '75 too. Yeah, okay, 75, 3, 4, 5, 6 it was. And then, and then '78. '78 was the last one for 32 years. Okay. And then they come in 2010. Long time.
Why don't you talk me through the very first time you saw them?
The first time I saw them, we got our tickets. Cost $4 a very, very expensive ticket, $4.50. A dollar went a long way back in '73. So we had a pretty good seat. I think we were roughly about 10th to 15th row, which wasn't too bad. And of course, before then, that was before Hello come out. So we didn't know what to expect as in live, as in the set list.
Which venue was this? Which venue, Leigh?
And it was Festival Hall, because they played at Festival Hall right through to '78, all those tours. And we thought, okay, for sure they're going to play stuff off Dog and Two Head, and possibly maybe something off Mark Kelly's, because we'd picked up Mark Kelly's. And then Pile Driver had come out. We didn't know much about Pile Driver back then at all, because it was a case of just going to Allen's or Brash's in Melbourne and just looking for the previous albums, and then find out what they did when they formed before Pictures of Matchstick Men come out. And the show by memory was amazing, because I kept scrapbooks, started on scrapbooks, and I used to write down. As soon as the gig finished, if I had a pen and paper on me, I'd write down the names of the songs, because back then we only had Go Set. So you'd write the songs down if you could or you remembered. And I just bought anything that I could. And you could find posters like Tivoli Arcade in Melbourne. There was a shop on the corner. There were posters. You could pick up posters of all your major artists back in those days.
And I guess for younger people listening in, they're totally unaware of just how important fan clubs were in yesteryear, and that's a huge thing. So obviously you're excited to be asked to run the Australian chapter of the fan club. So what was the next step? Where did it go from there?
I think it was a week after the Melbourne show. Me and a young bloke flew over to Adelaide and rocked up at their hotel. And Francis Rossi walked in, and he recognised me straight away, because we'd actually been backstage that night when I got the fan club. Me and my mate Simo, who passed away 2.5 years ago, a bloke from Tassie, and this other girl who I met in '76. We knocked on the back door on the railway line side of Festival Hall, and so there's already a chance we could go in. We're actually running an unofficial fan club, as it turned out. And the security guy said, hang on a minute. And then all of a sudden, Bob Young was their road manager, and he played a lot of harmonica and wrote a lot of songs with Rossi. He always said, Rossi Young, Rossi Young, Rossi Young. And he recognised me from 1976 when I walked up the back stairs of the Southern Cross Hotel, unbeknownst, because you couldn't get away with those sort of things back in those days by going through the front door. And went up the back door, and I heard someone singing and playing guitar, and there was Rossi and Bob Young. So
wow.
It was just one of those things that happened, and we stayed in a motel overnight in Adelaide, and then the tour, and then the merchandise guy, I met him there again, and then said, "You guys got tickets?" And we said, "No." Now, this is where the most amazing thing comes in. Okay, this is a story I think everyone should hear. The merchandise, as you walk in now to any venue, the merchandise is there for you: T-shirts, tour programs, posters, etc., etc. Now, when the encore came, me and my mate were right up the front, and then the curtain opened that back behind us, and this bloke said, "Oh, come here, you two. My name is Michael Chugg. I'm the tour manager." So I met Michael Chugg in 1978. He said, "Can you take the 2 trestle tables there at the front, take all this merchandise here at the front and sell it for $1 each? And then we'll pay you the next morning if you can rock up here at 6 in the morning, because we're leaving about 6:15." So we took it out the front, and we sold heaps. We sold heaps. And then we had to stay in a motel the next night. That night we had to stay somewhere else, and we didn't get a wake-up call. So by the time we got to the hotel, the band had gone, and we missed out on getting our money. I know. It was unreal. So I got lobbed with all the merchandise, which was just over 1,000 posters, 1,000 programs, 500 scarves, and 500 badges.
Wow. That's
what I had. And unfortunately, over the years, I moved around a lot, and at 95% of that got destroyed in a house fire on Black Saturday. And at the moment, I've still got about 40 programs, 40 posters, and 40 scarves, which I think maybe after people hear this podcast, they might think, "Oh, geez, I wouldn't mind buying some of that." So I'm trying to work out the best way around it.
What are your memories, I guess, of the times you met Alan? Obviously, I imagine you would have seen the Party Boys in the 80s.
Yes, I saw the Bombers. I saw the Party Boys, but only a couple of times back in the day. But I still followed. I followed Quo right up until probably 1990, when I went overseas for about 3 months.
I think one of the charms for Australian fans who had grown up with Status Quo in the 70s was to get so close to Alan when he was playing the clubs. Started playing the clubs with the Party Boys in the mid-80s.
I'll never forget, even though the fan club didn't last that long and the band went off the road for a little bit, I mean, people mustn't forget that in 1984, the end of the road, they did the end of the road, and that was supposedly the end of Status Quo, but of course it wasn't, and then Alan Lancaster left not long after that. But he was the nicest man, and instead of me going up to him saying backstage that night, instead of saying, "Hello, how are you, Alan? My name's Leigh," I had a lovely windshield on with a great picture of Quo on it, and I had a badge with President written on it, and it was like, I'm the president of your fan club, even though it was an unofficial fan club. I had my little plastic folders where you put inserts in them, and I had all these rare articles from German pop magazines, and I've got the photo I put up the other day on social media was a photo of him with me, and he's actually looking at that folder, and even in Adelaide with Rick Parfitt. Rick Parfitt was so he looked at what I'd written, because I took over a thing I'd written about when they first toured Australia, and he's looking at my wording going, "You have got such a great memory going back to 73 after 5 years, and you can remember the names of the songs we did, and all the songs that were written by so-called artists, every song, and it was just amazing." And And then Andy Bown was sitting there. And, of course, Andy Bown's been virtually a member since 74-5. And I talked to Andy Bown about, most people don't realise, Andy Bown was in a band called The Herd with Peter Frampton in the late 60s.
Closing, I mean, how do you think you will remember Alan Lancaster? Obviously, have you got a special memory of seeing Alan perform, or?
Well, I think the '78 tour was the big one because I had an opportunity, to go backstage before the gig, and then actually go in and say hello, Nuff, not Alan, hello, Nuff, because that was his nickname, and you know, and you had Reg, they all had their nicknames, and Spud. And my dear mate Ian Simpson, Akasimo, he sat in there and sat down next to John Coughlin and got his photo taken. And I've got a great memory of that. But just walking in there, and then a week later in Adelaide, when the band walked in through the door, Rossi recognised me. And then later on, we all sat down and we all had a chat, and I brought out a couple of my books I brought over, and the look on their faces, I think, thinking, oh my God, this guy's a collector, and then telling them that I wasn't 16, I was like 27, you know. I think they probably thinking, my God, he's an old fan, you know. And we all had a good laugh because after the gig, we wanted to party, and we were all laughing and making a lot of noise, and management came. This was at 2 a.m, and management told us to please leave. Francis and Alan and all of us, we had the biggest cackle, we had the biggest laugh you've ever heard. And I'd taken over even though I'd never played a guitar or bass guitar or anything, I actually took over my Bolero jazz bass, and I stayed with the roadies that first night, and the roadie said to me, oh, I love that bass. Would you like to swap it for one of Francis's guitars? And, of course, me being not thinking at the time, I said, no, I love this bass so much I can't swap it. Now, imagine had it been the other way around. My memories will always be because I had the Susie Quattro one before that. I actually had 2 fan clubs at the same time. It was hard work, hard yakka, but we did it. We did it. I'll never forget those days. Never forget those times. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Pardon the pun, but they did strike a chord with many Australian fans over the years, and you've been a loyal fan of Status Quo for a number of years, and it's been great to chat with you, Lemmy, and to get some of your stories
down. I appreciate it.
Folks, we have come to the end of this very special episode, show number 145, our tribute to Alan Lancaster. I do hope that we have managed to create something special for Alan and have in some way honoured the man and his music. Whether you're a friend or a fan of Alan Lancaster's, this one has been for all of you. If you wish to contact us, we can be reached at australianrockshow@gmail.com, and we thank you for your ongoing support of the podcast. I do wish to close this one out with something special. Rock and roll has been a part of my life since I was a kid, and it's all I've ever known. Going from a kid in the mid-1970s, gazing over the gatefold sleeve of my big sister's copy of Status Quo's On the Level album, to years later watching that rhythm section close up in a small pub are wonderful memories that I will cherish forever. With that in mind, here is a very rare recording from February 1989, courtesy of my brother and his trusty handheld tape recorder, of the Mighty Bombers, live at the Crow's Nest Hotel in Sydney, burning through AC/DC's Have a Drink on Me. And folks, I just don't think it gets any better than this. Until next time, this is Dennis. Out.